As our tale begins, Pietro Vannucci hurls obscenities at his younger sister, Lucrezia, believing that she has dishonored their family name by falling in love with his rival, a workman named Beppo. Pietro strikes her before racing off to take revenge on the man whom she loves. And thus begins the adventure of the Six Napoleons. In his book, A Study in Celluloid, Michael Cox recalled, "It was June Wyndham Davies who spotted John Cain as a likely adapter for this episode. She had seen his play, Murder, Dear Watson, at the mill at Sonning, and enjoyed it as an ingenious pastiche. Now, the author was asked to give us a straight version of one of the most famous stories in the canon. He and David Carson certainly gave us a vigorous opening, but also allowed for a touch or two of humor throughout. And as we learned from our discussion with David Carson earlier this year, the long opening shot of this episode was actually an homage to one of the director's favorite filmmakers, Louis Malle. Eager to discover how this sequence was achieved in Malle's Atlantic City, Carson convinced the Granada crew to work with him to recreate the titular moment. The result was a complex shot of moving walls, dollies, and tracks that managed to paint a complex, emotional picture wrapped inside a worthy nod to a classic film. Back at Baker Street, Holmes, Watson, and Inspector Lestrade lounge near the fire, enjoying tobacco, port, and each other's company.
Anything remarkable on hand, Lestrade?
No. Nothing in particular.
Then tell us about it.
Now you come to mention it, Mr. Holmes, there's no denying there is something on my mind.
Lestrade explains that one sunny day, art dealer Morse Hudson was shocked when he emerged from his back room to find that one of his statues, a plaster bust of the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, had been smashed to pieces. Lestrade continues that the following night, a second Napoleon bust was also stolen. This one, burgled from the residence of Dr. Barnicot of Kennington Road, was one of a pair purchased from Morse Hudson. And later that very same night, its twin was also smashed to bits inside the doctor's office 2 miles away.
This is certainly very novel.
Yes, I thought it would please you. Though in my opinion it comes more into Dr. Watson's line than ours.
Disease?
I should say madness. Queer sort of madness, too. You wouldn't think there was anybody living nowadays, would you, have such a hatred for Napoleon Bonaparte?
Actually, there are no limits to the possibilities of monomania. You see, there is the condition that the modern French psychologists have called an idée fixe. Now, if someone became obsessed was, say, an injustice committed to an ancestor during the Napoleonic Wars, he might form an idée fixe, and under its influence, he might be capable of any fantastic outrage.
My dear Watson, that won't do.
How do you explain it, then?
I don't attempt to do so.
I see.
I would simply observe that there's a certain method in this gentleman's eccentric madness. I mean, for example, in Dr. Barnicott's house, where a sound might arouse the sleeping family, the bust was taken outside before being broken, whereas in his surgery, where there was less danger of alarm, it was smashed where it stood.
Well, I only mention it because you usually have a taste for all that is out of the common, no matter how trivial.
No, I dare call nothing trivial, Lestrade. Some of my most classic cases have had the least promising commencement.
Yeah, that dreadful business of the Abernethy family.
Ooh.
I'd hardly call the dismemberment of an entire family trivial.
Well, Watson, would you be so kind as to explain?
What? Well, the point is that it only came to Holmes's notice because of the depth to which the parsley had sunk into the butter on a hot day.
Ah.
So you see, I cannot afford to smile at your three busts, Lestrade. However, I would be obliged if you would keep me informed as to developments.
This episode of the program is simply chock full of memorable supporting performances. So many, in fact, that it would be a challenge to do them all justice here. But taking just a moment to acknowledge the actors in the Italian quarter, Pietro Vannucci was played here by Vincenzo Nicolai. The British actor was born in 1958 to Italian parents and trained at LAMDA, the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. He got his start on television shows like Young Indiana Jones and EastEnders before landing featured roles in films like Alien 3, Captain Phillips, and The Dark Knight, often putting his command of the Italian language to good use. He currently maintains both his British and Italian citizenship and works regularly in both countries. Beppo, the villain of our tale, was portrayed by Emil Wolk. Wolk was born in 1944 in New York City, but moved to London at a young age when his father became the principal baritone at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. His early career involved participation with various experimental theater companies before moving into the director's chair at the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Royal National Theatre, and the Royal Exchange, Manchester. He was awarded the Laurence Olivier Theatre Award in 1988 for Best Actor in a Musical for his work on Kiss Me Kate, and he even helmed a production called Sherlock Holmes in Trouble, a pastiche which won accolades for its irreverent silliness and acrobatics. The elder statesman, Papa Vannucci, was played by Steve Plytas. Born in Constantinople in 1913, Plytas had a long career in television and film, beginning at the age of 34 and taking on roles in Secret Agent, Doctor Who, and The Avengers. Not to mention playing a small role in the 1968 Sherlock Holmes series starring Peter Cushing. Sadly, his episode, The Greek Interpreter, in which he played Crito Manikyros, is now considered missing or lost. Later in life, he appeared in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Tim Burton's Batman as the Doctor. Plytas worked regularly until the time of his death, which took place in December of 1994. And finally, Lucrezia Vannucci was played here by actress Marina Sirtis in one of her earliest television roles. Sirtis, who was born in London, was the daughter of Greek parents who initially forbade her from auditioning for drama school. But Sirtis went behind their back, auditioned, and was accepted to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. From there, She would inhabit many roles on the stage and screen, but of course, she is most widely known for playing Counselor Deanna Troi on 7 seasons of Gene Roddenberry's visionary series, Star Trek: The Next Generation, where she would reunite with Six Napoleons director David Carson on 4 episodes of that series, including the fan favorite, Yesterday's Enterprise. Carson and Sirtis would also collaborate on the feature film Star Trek Generations, and she has since made appearances in Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Enterprise, Star Trek Picard, and the animated series Star Trek Lower Decks. In 2019, Sirtis made her West End stage debut in Dark Sublime, playing a freelance actor and forgotten icon of a British TV show whose encounter with a fan changes both of their lives. And while Sirtis had no scenes with Mr. Jeremy Brett in the Six Napoleons, she admitted to us in a private conversation that she would find a way onto set each day just to watch Jeremy perform, even if it meant sitting in the corner as they filmed his scenes. She said that watching Jeremy was like receiving a masterclass in acting. She also found him to be a very private person, but she admired the actor greatly. After spending many years in Los Angeles, Sirtis now resides in her hometown of London. The next day, Holmes receives a telegram from Lestrade, requesting his presence at the scene of yet another crime. As they arrive in Kensington, Holmes takes note of the steps leading up to the house, one being wet while the others remain dry. Superfans of the original story might notice a slight deviation here, and in his book, executive producer Michael Cox explained. On arrival at the scene of another crime, Holmes makes a surprising observation about the steps leading to the front door. Quote, "The top steps willed down and the other ones dry." We changed this to the bottom step because it seemed impossible to swill the top one and leave the others untouched. A trifle, perhaps, but there's nothing so important as trifles. Inside, Lestrade confirms Holmes' suspicions that the Napoleon bust case has taken a much darker turn, as he introduces them to the resident of the scene.
Mr. Harker, allow me to present Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Mr. Horace Harker of the Central Press Syndicate.
Good of you to come, gentlemen. Please forgive my agitation.
No apology necessary, Mr. Harker. A body on one's front doorstep is always unsettling.
You've told him, then?
Oh, not a word.
Now, tell us exactly what occurred.
Extraordinary thing. All my life, I've been collecting other people's news. And now I have a real-life story of my own, and I can't put 2 words together. If I had been a journalist and walked in through that door, I would have interviewed myself and had 2 columns in every London newspaper. And here I am, giving away valuable copy by telling my story over and over again to a string of different people. However, I've heard of your name, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. So if you could explain this queer business, I'd be more than paid for my trouble in telling you my story.
Mr. Harker explains that he was awoken in the small hours of the morning by a commotion, followed by a scream. Searching his rooms, he was dismayed to find an open window and the absence of his Napoleonic visage. But the true shock came when he stepped out of his front door, only to trip and fall upon the body of a dead man whose throat was cut ear to ear.
I shall live that moment over and over again in my dreams.
Do we know who the murdered man was?
Not yet, but you can see the body at the mortuary if you wish.
Where did you purchase your bust, Mr. Harker?
From Mr. Hudson of Kennington Road.
Do we know what became of it?
The officer at the door tells me it's been found in the front garden of an empty house in Camden House Road. I was just going round to see it. Will you come?
In a moment, Lestrade. Well, the intruder had either very long legs or was the most active man, with that area beneath. It was no mean feat to climb up to this ledge, let alone to open the window. Mr. Harker, will you come with us to see the remains of your bust?
I must make something of it, although I've no doubt that every newspaper in London will be on the street with a full and detailed account. Just my luck.
Michael Cox was quite pleased with the casting of this particular character. In his book, he admitted, "The casting director for this episode was Judy Hayfield, and whether it was she or the director who suggested Eric Sykes to play Harker, it was a marvelous choice. Although often associated with comedy, Sykes brings a failed, lugubrious quality to his portrait of the journalist, too upset by disaster to make the most of the occasional scoops which come his way." Director David Carson spoke warmly about his time with Mr. Sykes. He remembered, "When I first met him to talk about this role, I remember him saying, 'One of the problems about acting in films for me is that I'm deaf. I can't hear anything, you see, so I don't know what's going on. I did a film called Sherlock Holmes, and we had to all ride out, and I was on this burro, this mule, and never knew when it was going to start. They were too far away to shout action, so they fired a gun. And when they fired the gun, my burro went crazy, and I had to hang on for dear life, which just made it all the funnier." In response, David Carson asked, "Well, what are you going to do when I say action?" To which Sykes replied, "Just give me a nod." It was a pleasure having such a great comedian and great actor working on set. It was wonderful. Eric Sykes was born in 1923 and first came to prominence in radio in the 1950s. His writing and acting credits are, frankly, far too numerous to list. But suffice to say that he is considered, by many, to be a British national treasure. Sykes served as a wireless operator in the RAF during World War II, but proximity to heavy fire and explosions began to take a toll on his hearing, and by the time he left the service, he was profoundly deaf. But this disability, coupled with his encroaching blindness, only made his future achievements more remarkable. Sykes received early acclaim for his work as a writer on the popular British radio program, The Goon Show, and went on to star famously in the black and white sitcom Sykes and a ... in which each episode included a unique premise or scenario, such as Sykes and a burglary, Sykes and an elephant, or Sykes and a Cold War. The series ran for 59 episodes from 1960 to 1965, and a remake of that show, filmed in color, was released in 1972 under the singular title, Sykes, which also included his original co-star, Hattie Jakes, and ran until 1979. Sykes would go on to appear in many shows and films, with notable appearances in 2001's The Others with Nicole Kidman and 2005's Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. He also provided the narration for the children's series Teletubbies, and was the author of numerous novels, including his own biography, in which he discussed his deafness, his blindness, and his quadruple heart bypass surgery. In 1986, he was appointed as an Officer of the Order of the British Empire for his services to drama in a career spanning 50 years. And in 2005, following a petition by members of Parliament, he was promoted to Commander. According to Monty Python's Michael Palin, Sykes was one of the nicest, most decent men in the business, and one of a kind, even if he could never hear the laughter of the nation that adored him. After a brief illness, Eric Sykes died in his home on July 4th, 2012, at the age of 89. At Campden House Road, the trio examine the remains of Mr. Harker's bust.
Well?
We have a long way to go, but there is one suggestive fact. He didn't smash this in the house or immediately outside it.
Well, perhaps he was so rattled and bustled by meeting this other fellow that he hardly knew what he was doing.
That's likely enough. But why did he choose to destroy it outside this particular house?
It's empty. So he knew he wouldn't be disturbed.
Yeah. But there's another empty house further up the street he must have passed. Why not destroy it there?
The lamp!
By Jove, you're right. What are we to make of that?
Holmes,
Remember it. Docket it. We may come on something later which will bear upon it. Meanwhile, before we go our separate ways, I suggest we make one last concerted visit.
where to?
The morgue.
At the morgue, Holmes examines the body of the murdered man. Among the possessions found on his person was a torn photograph, but little else of note.
What steps do you propose next, Lestrade?
Well, the most practical way of getting at it, in my opinion, is to identify the dead man. Once we know who he is and who his associates are, we should have a good start in learning who killed him on the doorstep of Mr. Horace Harker. Don't you think so, Mr. Holmes?
No doubt. It is not the way that I would conduct the case.
Oh, what would you do?
No, don't let me influence you, Lestrade. I suggest you follow your line of inquiry and I mine. Then we can compare notes and each supplement the other. But if you are returning to Pitt Street, I would be grateful if you would tell Mr. Harker that I have quite made up my mind in this matter. I'm certain that it was a dangerous and homicidal lunatic with Napoleonic delusions at his house last night. It will help him with this article.
You don't seriously believe that, Holmes?
Don't I? Well, perhaps not. I'm sure it will please Mr. Horace Harker and the subscribers to the Central Press Agency. I would be grateful, Lestrade, if you could make it convenient to come round to Baker Street at 6 o'clock this evening. Until then, I would like to keep this photograph found in the dead man's pocket.
Oh, Mr. Holmes, that might be a vital clue.
Just it is. Otherwise, it's of no interest to me. Good luck, Lestrade.
When asked by Stephen Doyle of the Sherlock Holmes Review if he found playing the part of Holmes something of a working vacation from his life on stage, Mr. Brett replied, "A working vacation, my dear friend, no. It is the most enormous tunnel of work I have ever undertaken. Because it's in the first person, from Watson's mouth, Holmes does most of the talking, and, therefore, one never really draws breath. One just opens one's mouth and goes on. It's much easier to learn Shakespeare and rhyme and couplet than it is to learn Doyle. And when I say learn, I mean not just learn, but to know it inside out so you can bounce on it. You've got to be able to fly with it. Holmes is the most tenacious character to play because he's constantly like a magnet. He draws the audience and everybody around to him through this extraordinary white stillness that he has. I find him absolutely thrilling to play. More thrilling than exhausting, but they go together. I always find that at the end of one, I think, my God, I am much more tired than I realized." Later, at the shop of art dealer Morse Hudson, Holmes inquires about the man in the photo. The proprietor recognizes the face at once as belonging to a man named Beppo, an Italian pieceworker whom he had briefly employed.
Perhaps he was responsible for the breakages.
Responsible for the breakages? Responsible for the breakages? My dear sir, this is an international conspiracy. A nihilist plot. Red Republicans, I call them. Yes, no one but an anarchist would go about breaking statues.
Did they break every one that you sold?
Break everyone I sold? Well, hardly that. Just the two bought by a local doctor and the one left here in my shop. If anything happened to the other three, I know nothing of it.
3. So there were 6 to begin with.
6 to begin with? Yes, a batch of 6. I ordered them especially from Gelder and Company of Stepney. They do excellent moulding work.
Do you happen to know the names and addresses of the other customers?
My ledgers, Mr. Holmes, are confidential.
Mr. Hudson, if your theory is correct, oughtn't we to warn these people of this most dangerous plot?
And who better to do that than Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Yes, quite right, sir. Yes, the country slumbers, but we shall remain vigilant. Follow me, sir.
Tonight, in the role of Mr. Morse Hudson, we have Mr. Gerald Campion. Campion would have been a familiar face to British audiences of the day. He was known for his work in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Carry On Sergeant, and Department S, but was certainly best known for playing the title role in the long-running British children's comedy series Billy Bunter of the Greyfriars School, which ran from 1952 to 1961. In that show, Campion played a 14-year-old schoolboy, even though he was 29 at the time he was cast. Sherlock Holmes came much later in his career, and his final role occurred in 1990 in the series Up the Garden Path, though his final appearance came in 1992 with the video release of Doctor Who, Shada, which attempted to reconstruct a lost episode of that series that was shot back in 1963 but never completed due to a BBC strike at the time. So, as a result, Campion's final on-screen appearance featured him as a much younger man. The son of a scriptwriter, Campion initially trained to be an actor at RADA, and like his co-star Eric Sykes, he also served as a radio operator in the RAF, where he was stationed in Kenya before returning home in 1946 to devote himself to acting. Born in Bloomsbury, London, Campion was a distant relative of legendary actor Charlie Chaplin, his mother being Chaplin's first cousin. Later in life, Campion turned his attention to fine food and devoted his time to running a number of restaurants and bars across England. Most notable of these was the Key Club on London's Dean Street, a discreet watering hole for fellow actors, and the Soho private drinking club, Jerry's, in Shaftesbury Avenue. Surrounded by family and friends, Gerald Campion passed away in 2002 at his home in the south of France. Mr. Hudson provides Holmes with the names and addresses of the remaining owners and directs the detective to Gelder and Company for additional inquiries. There, they meet the manager, Herr Mendelstam, who becomes enraged at the sight of Beppo's photo. He recounts the misadventure that he suffered from the man's actions the previous year and details how Beppo knifed another Italian man in the street before fleeing from the police into his shop.
The young Italian survived, so Beppo went only to prison for 1 year. We have a cousin of his working here. Perhaps you would wish to speak with him?
No. Not a word to the cousin, I beg of you. The matter is very important, and the further I go with it, the more important it seems.
So, yeah, I really thought his cousin might know when Beppo is to be released.
Herr Mendelstam, if my surmises are correct, our friend Beppo has been out of jail for at least 11 days.
Ach du lieber Gott.
Our final featured cast member of the episode, in the role of Mendelstam, manager of Gelder and Company, is Vernon Dobtcheff. Once called the patron saint of the acting profession by Rupert Everett, Dobtcheff was born to a Russian family at Nîmes in France in 1934 and reared at the Ashcamp Preparatory School in Eastbourne, Sussex, where he was bitten by the acting bug and subsequently was awarded the school's acting cup. With over 368 credits to his name on IMDb alone, it would be impossible to do justice to the man's career here today. Suffice to say that he has appeared in everything, from Fiddler on the Roof to Condor Man, from the Borgias to the Highlander TV series, and from the James Bond film The Spy Who Loved Me to the original Avengers TV show. He also appeared in the 1966 BBC miniseries of The Three Musketeers, directed by Peter Hammond and starring Jeremy Brett. And he secured his place in pop culture history when in 1969 he became the first actor ever to utter the phrase Time Lord into the canon of Doctor Who. He even took a turn as the great detective himself in the 2018 short film L'Hypothèse de la Reine Rouge, where an older French-speaking Holmes goes toe-to-toe with the gentleman thief Arsène Lupin in the year 1928. But who could forget Mr. Dobtcheff in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade?
Tapestries? Dear me, the man is dense. This is a castle, isn't it? There are tapestries.
This is a castle, and we have many tapestries. And if you are a Scottish lord, then
I am Mickey Mouse. How dare he?
Today, Vernon Dobtcheff resides in London at the age of 87. That evening, as Holmes and Watson arrive back at Baker Street, the detective notices the headlines on the evening paper and emits a jolly exclamation, much to his friend's surprise.
Hey! Watson, Harker has baited the trap for us.
What do you mean?
The press is a very valuable institution if one knows how to use it.
Read all about it. Stand it.
Very cunning, Holmes.
Thank you, Watson.
Upstairs, they find Inspector Lestrade present and helping himself to a peek inside their private casebooks. Amused, Holmes and Watson conceal themselves, opting not to embarrass their friend and re-entering with fresh exuberance.
Lestrade!
Mr. Holmes? Doctor?
Please, sit down.
Oh. Thank you. Well, what luck, Mr. Holmes?
We've had a very busy day. Not entirely wasted. I can trace each of the busts now from the beginning.
The busts. Well, of course, you have your own methods, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Not for me to say a word against them, but I think I've done a better day's work than you. I've identified the dead man.
Splendid. Who is it?
Pietro Vannucci, son of a respectable Italian tradesman, but involved with a secret political society.
Red anarchists?
Oh, you've been talking to Morse Hudson, haven't you?
Do go on, Lestrade.
I refer, of course, to the mafia, which, as you may know, enforces its decrees by assassination. Obviously, our murderer broke the rules in some fashion, and Pietro is put on his track, possibly with that photograph to aid identification. They meet, but Pietro receives his own death wound in the scuffle.
Excellent, Lestrade, but I don't quite follow your explanation of the destruction of the busts.
Oh, the busts. You can never get those busts out of your head. The busts are nothing. Petty larceny, 6 months at most. No. It's murder we're really investigating. And I tell you, I'm gathering all the threads into my hand.
And the next stage?
Ah, well, now. We have an inspector who's made a speciality of the Italian quarter. I shall go down there with him, find the man in that photograph you're carrying, arrest him for murder. What you say, Mr. Holmes? Will you come with us?
I think not. I fancy Chiswick as the address most likely to find him.
Chiswick?
If you and some of your men will come with us to Chiswick tonight, I will go to the Italian quarter with you tomorrow, and there will be no harm in the delay. I suggest you dine with us. And then you're welcome to the sofa. A few hours' sleep will do us all good. I don't intend to leave the house before 11, and it is unlikely that we shall be home before morning.
But, Mr. Holmes...
In the meantime, I have a letter to send by express messenger. Mrs. Hudson! Mrs. Hudson!
Chiswick.
In his book, Granada's Greatest Detective, author Keith Frankel sang the praises of this wonderfully constructed scene. He wrote, Lestrade's long suspected but tenaciously veiled envy of Holmes's prodigious forte for criminal investigation is finally substantiated here, when, in a charmingly coined collusion between playwright and performer, the sleuth spies the inspector, furtively snatching a glance at one of his personal documents. Instantly, the cruel, intractable instrument of reason becomes the waggish instigator of hijinks as he and Watson conspiratorially contrive a gabbling chorus of hubbub, vocal enough to alert the inspector to their presence and dart away from suspicion. For Holmes, the sight of an unguarded Lestrade, evidently more than a little inclined to learn something of his methods, is too gorgeous a gift to spoil by shaming him with a dressing down. Conversely, the jape is also indicative of the protagonist's respect and affection for the inspector, and how important it is that he not be seen to suffer any loss of pride. Later that night, the trio stake out a Chiswick villa from cover, awaiting their prey. Watson and Lestrade shiver in the cold and sleepily attempt to pass the time.
Watson, if you've caught a cold, it's your fault. You left the rugs behind.
Sorry, Holmes.
Is that 2 o'clock? Don't suppose we can smoke, can we?
No.
No, thought as much.
Are your men in position?
Oh, yes.
Have a humbug, Lestrade.
Watson, this is no time for humbugs. Look!
Suddenly, Beppo emerges, cutting across the lawn, scaling the building, and entering the open upstairs window. Inside, he snatches the Napoleonic bust and exits through the back door, where Holmes and the others watch as he smashes the bust under the gaslight lamp. From out of the shadows, Holmes lunges, tackling Beppo to the ground. Lestrade's police whistle brings backup, and within moments, the struggling thief is subdued. As Holmes examines the remains of the plaster cast, the owner of the villa nonchalantly emerges.
Oh dear, it's smashed.
Mr. Josiah Brown, I presume?
Yes, sir. And you no doubt are Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I had the note you sent by the express messenger, and I did exactly as you told me. Following your instructions, we locked every door so as to lead him into the back. And I'm very glad to see you have the rascal. Now, I hope, gentlemen, that you will come in and partake of some refreshment.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. The hour is rather late. Good night.
Good night.
Come, Watson, we have work to do.
Work? What work?
Lestrade, if you will come round to Baker Street tonight at 6 o'clock, I hope to be able to show you that you still have not grasped the full meaning of this business.
Oh, I think you'll find my theory of the mafia will work out all right, Mr. Holmes.
Good night, Lestrade.
Director David Carson remembered these moments fondly. He recalled, "The Six Napoleons was interesting because it gave us a terrific opportunity to make an episode, which I think this is about, between Holmes and Lestrade. The whole thing about them hunting together and falling asleep in the hut and being woken up by the guy and then them popping up behind the hedge. using relatively warm comic things in order to take us away from the desperation of this guy doing whatever he was doing and focus on the relationship between the three men stuck in the middle of nowhere and arguing about humbugs. To me, that's more what it was about. The next morning, as Watson receives a shave from the local barber, Holmes meets clandestinely with one Papa Vanucci Sr. on the street outside of 221B, where he receives a mysterious missive. Later, Lestrade provides his solution to the case as Holmes tidies up the room.
Since the manager of Gelder and Company was mainly responsible for Beppo's initial arrest, we see the breaking of the busts as a pathetic attempt to revenge himself. And it was possibly these senseless acts of violence which transgressed the mafia's code of behavior and led to the murder of young Vanucci. There. I think that takes care of those details you mentioned last night. Don't you, Mr. Holmes?
Holmes?
Ha! Yes, Watson.
Well, what do you think of Lestrade's theories?
I'm sure that they have the greatest interest, but I regret to say I've not listened to a word of them. Forgive my inattention, Lestrade. I had a rather late night.
Oh, what do you think I had?
Come in!
Is Mr. Sherlock Holmes here? Ah. I fear I am a little late, but the trains were very awkward.
No matter, no matter. Have you brought the item?
You said in your telegram that Mr. Hudson had given you my address.
Mr. Sandiford of Reading.
The same, sir. How do you do?
It's those busts again.
Correct, Lestrade.
Did he also tell you just how much my wife paid for it?
No, he did not.
Well, sir, I am an honest man, though not a very rich one, and she only gave 15 shillings for it, and I think you ought to know that before I take the £10 from you that you offered in your telegram.
Oh, your scruple does you much honor, Mr. Sandiford, but I have stated my price, and I shall stick to it.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Holmes. That's very handsome of you. Your bust, sir. You know, my wife has always maintained that there is a marked resemblance between myself and the Emperor. Can't say I see it myself.
Six Napoleon.
I contacted Mr. Sandiford by telegram this morning. Now, if you will sign this paper in front of witnesses, it is simply to say that you transfer every possible rights that you could ever have in the bust to me.
Happy to, Mr. Holmes. Happy.
I am a methodical man, and one never knows what turn events may take afterwards. Here is your £10 notes, and good evening, Mr. Sandiford.
Very much, Mr. Holmes. It's a good evening, gentlemen.
Ready, at last, to reveal his solution to the case, Holmes silently rips the tablecloth out from under the dishes, nary moving a one. He spreads the red velvet cloth upon his workspace, positions his riding crop at hand, and places the 6th Napoleon bust in the center of the table. When asked if the tablecloth pull was real or showbiz magic, director David Carson replied, "Real. We had a magician come in and teach him how to do it. The cups had to be exactly the right kind of cups and all of that, and the first attempts smashed everything all over the place. But we practiced it, and in fact, there is a little hiccup in the last one he does. The cloth gets caught slightly and a cup moves, but that was the last set of cups we had, so he had to get it right. But much like the violin, Jeremy didn't like to do things that he couldn't do, so he wouldn't have let it be a trick. You can see in the cutting, we don't cut away from it in the middle. It was the actual thing that happened." And while the brilliance of this effect cannot help but to elicit a smile from viewers, author and commentator David Stewart Davies pointed out what he found to be an incongruity within this sequence. In his book, Dancing in the Moonlight, he wrote, "The deftness and skill with which he whisks the cloth from the table, leaving the crockery and cutlery in place, are, in a sense, typical of Holmes, but the business is Jeremy Brett's, not Conan Doyle's, perhaps illustrating the process of osmosis that was occurring at this time. In many ways, Jeremy was blending his own character with that of the detective. In doing this, he must have, at times, been sublimating his own natural effusiveness and gregariousness. The manic depression was taking hold, and colleagues began to note swings in his moods. Again, his own sensitivity is mirrored in his reaction to Lestrade's tribute to him. At times like these, the character wanders away from Conan Doyle's concept of the detective as a cold thinking machine. It is something Jeremy Brett would not have done in the early days.
Now, gentlemen, if you would give me your undivided attention.
With a single strike, Holmes smashes the plaster bust to fragments. Then, bending eagerly over the shattered remains, he reveals a singular prize.
Gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to one of the most precious objects in the world. The famous Black Pearl of the Borgias.
Bravo, Holmes! Bravo! Oh, your legerdemain rivals that of Maskelyne himself.
Oh, this surpasses it. The Borgia pearl's been missing since it disappeared from the Prince of Colonna's bedroom in the Dacre Hotel over a year ago.
As you may remember, Lestrade, I was consulted upon the case at the time. Observe and learn. The moment the name Venucci surfaced in this case, I immediately became intrigued. The Princess of Colonna's maid, for some time, had been one Lucrezia Venucci. Suspicion fell on her, and it was proved that she had a brother in London, but we failed to trace any connection between them. Beppo was the connection. He had been courting Lucrezia Venucci for some time.
From his pocket, Holmes reveals the missing half of the dead man's photograph, and connecting the two sides, forms a complete image of Beppo Cicciolini, alongside his intended Lucrezia Venucci.
Where did you get that?
Papa Venucci.
Oh, I see.
When the Venucci family planned to steal the Black Pearl, they used Beppo as a go-between for Lucrezia and her brother. Beppo gleaned enough information to execute the robbery himself and make off with the pearl. Pietro Venucci, the brother, caught up with him outside Gelder's workshop. Beppo stabbed him. He then fled into the warehouse and took refuge in the drawing room. He knew he only had moments in which to conceal the pearl, which would otherwise be found on him when he was searched. Among all the plaster casts drying that day, he made for a batch of 6 that had been earmarked for Morse Hudson, and the base of one of them was still soft. It was an admirable hiding place. As soon as Beppo got out of prison, he managed to find employment with Mr. Morse Hudson and set about tracking the Six Napoleons down. He found and destroyed 3 of them. But the night he located Harker's, Pietro Venucci, intent on vengeance, accosted him, and this time Beppo slit his throat. With only 2 busts left, it was likely he would try the London one first.
Hence our visit to Chiswick.
Exactly, Watson. That left only the Reading bust. I bought it in your presence from the owner. And there it lies.
Well, Mr. Holmes, I've seen you handle a good many cases in my time, but I don't know that I ever knew a more workmanlike one than this. We're not jealous of you, you know, at Scotland Yard. Oh, so we're proud of you. And if you come down tomorrow, there's not a man from the oldest inspector to the youngest constable who wouldn't be glad to shake you by the hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jeremy Brett was very particular about how the camera captured his performance in this fragile moment. At a private event in 1992, he recalled, "In that moment, I said to my director, David Carson, it is the nearest thing that we ever see of Holmes to breaking up, but he mustn't cry. So just keep rolling, and the one where the eyes fill with tears, that's the one. But if anything falls onto my cheek, that's not the one." So we did it about 4 times, and there was one which we thought the best.
Goodbye, Lestrade. And if a little problem comes your way, I shall be happy if I can to give you a hint or two as to its solution.
And with that, Holmes extends his hand to the inspector in friendship, before taking up his violin to reflect upon his triumph. As the first series of The Return came to a close, Granada producers and executives alike celebrated the show's stellar performance among viewers. The first episode, The Empty House, had drawn an audience of more than 10 million, and 5 of the 7 episodes that year figured in the top 20 list for all channels, and episodes were even starting to appear on commercial video cassettes. Critical praise for the show was also unrivaled, and reviewers who had been skeptical before found themselves unable to deny the magic of the series. Alan Coren of the Mail on Sunday wrote, "I deem a critic to be derelict of duty if he does not express an opinion he has seen fit to change, and I have come to relish that Sunday hour on ITV as perhaps the week's regular best. Jeremy Brett's possessed, capricious, volatile, dangerous, but above all, convincingly brilliant Holmes wipes the memory clean of all previous portrayals. It is not easy for an actor to depict genius. Maybe he has to be one." But for Jeremy Brett, genius had taken its toll. It was at this time that Jeremy's inner struggle with bipolar disorder and manic depression finally erupted to the surface. After a series of frightening and uncontrolled mood swings led his family and friends to fear for his physical safety, Jeremy agreed that he needed professional help, and he admitted himself to the Maudsley Psychiatric Hospital in South London. He later recalled, "When I had finished filming the Six Napoleons, I was so thrilled to be free and resting, but I couldn't sleep. I would go into my favorite restaurant and buy every table in the place a bottle of champagne. Everyone was delighted, but the people who loved me, my friends, were concerned. My behavior was becoming uncomfortable, and then it began to go wrong. My brain just went. The first thing that happened was that the whole world went pink and white. It was wildly metaphysical. Then I got angry. I accused God of needing spectacles, and by the time I was admitted to the Maudsley Hospital in 1986, I was so confused that I couldn't relate to anything or anyone around me. All I could do was lie face down with my fists clenched to my face. The crisis of my wife's death and the tremendous burden of Sherlock Holmes finally snapped me. At the doctor's urging, Jeremy would remain at Maudsley Hospital for nearly 2 months. Friend Edward Hardwick recalled, "I went to see him in the Maudsley, which is a grim, depressing place, although the treatment is absolutely superb. He was there under the name of Huggins because everyone was keen that his illness should not get out to the press. The poor man. They had really brought him down with drugs to get rid of the manic element of the illness. That was the thing with Jeremy. If you rang him up and he sang down the phone, 'I feel wonderful,' then you had to be worried. But in the Maudsley, when I saw him, he was very subdued." To Marilyn Willison of the Sunday Times, Jeremy revealed what helped him through those challenging days. He said, "I soon realized that my son really needed me well again. That meant a great deal to me. It gave me great courage, and I thought, if he needs me, I can never let this happen again," which made me turn a corner in myself. I vowed, lying face down on my bed, I will never, never, never risk my mental health again just to be a bloody actor. Showing real signs of improvement, Mr. Brett was eventually transferred to a secluded, high-end private clinic, graciously paid for by Granada, where it was hoped that Jeremy would find the peace he needed to fully recover away from the prying eyes of the public. Sadly, this was not to be. On December 1st, 1986, The Sun, a British tabloid, carried the banner headline, "TV Sherlock in a Mental Home." Other papers soon followed suit, one even suggesting that Jeremy had contracted the AIDS virus. With bylines such as, "Actor Brett goes crazy with grief," it was all a hurtful intrusion into his privacy, one for which Jeremy would never forgive the press. But with the undying support of his family and friends, particularly his son David and Edward and Prim Hardwick, Jeremy did recover. He stated, "Recovering from my breakdown has done the most amazing thing for my confidence and self-esteem. I'm proud of myself, which has taken me a long time to recognize. I'm thrilled to be healthy again, and I know it's a relief to my family and friends. It's such a good feeling to know that you're not going to embarrass or let them down anymore. I'll never do that to them again. It's too rude, too vulgar, too bad-mannered. These things do happen, but I don't want to be a burden on those close to me anymore by being ill, and I won't." Jeremy was prescribed a new regime of medications aimed at regulating his moods, but he abhorred the drugs, deeply fearing that they would somehow dull or diminish his acting talents. However, he also knew that without them, he could lose stability once more. So, in 1987, with newfound focus and determination, Jeremy Brett returned to Baker Street, eager to take on the next chapter in the Granada Project, an ambitious 2-hour telefilm based on Conan Doyle's novel, The Sign of Four. Original air date on the ITV network was August 20th, 1986 at 9 p.m., dramatized by John Cain and directed by David Carson. Well, the Six Napoleons marks Mr. Carson's final contribution to the series. But with the Blue Carbuncle, The Resident Patient, and The Musgrave Ritual also under his belt, I think it's safe to say that this incredible director qualifies as series royalty. Thank you, David, for all of your amazing work. Dramatist John Cain would only pen this single episode of the Granada Holmes series. Born in Scotland in 1945, Cain studied drama in Glasgow, but when he won a place in the then-new Actors Studio of the Royal Shakespeare Company, he left school behind and embraced the life of a performer in London. At 20, Cain became the youngest actor ever to be made an associate member of the RSC, having performed alongside the likes of Ben Kingsley, Alan Howard, and others. But after 7 years with the company, he decided to turn his focus to writing, and he left the RSC to lend his pen to multiple series on the BBC One and Two, beginning with the Terry Scott sketch comedy show Scott On, where he was given a chance to hone his skill as a comedic writer, a skill which he would put into practice for nearly 4 decades. In the ensuing years, he would divide his time as a writer and an actor, returning often to the Royal Shakespeare Company and taking on memorable screen roles in Paradise Postponed, Taggart, and Doctor Who, just to name a few. He also penned versions of The Wizard of Oz and Showboat for the RSC, both of which were nominated for Olivier's. In 2006, Mr. Cain retired with his wife to the south of France, where we attempted to track him down for an interview to discuss his time on the series. He politely declined. But in place of a conversation, Mr. Kane was kind enough to provide us with a few recollections about his time with the Six Napoleons.
First of all, I'd like to say how thrilled I was to be asked to write an episode of this wonderful series. In my estimation, Jeremy Brett is the finest Sherlock Holmes there has been, and I take into account wonderful old black and white Sherlock Holmes with Basil Rathbone, and also the television series with Peter Cushing, who was very splendid. But Jeremy brought an intensity to the part. You could believe that he was a drug addict, and a very charming man. He was so welcoming when I came to the read-through before the beginning of rehearsals. Very, very charming, very complimentary. Although I have to say, in all honesty, that I was not entirely responsible for the writing of the Six Napoleons. That, in fact, was a lot to do with the director, David Carson. He felt that the script that I had handed in was a little bit too confined within rooms, etc., and so he invented the whole of the Italian sequences. That's nothing to do with me. That's entirely to do with David Carson. He again explained his reasons for doing it. I didn't see what he was doing to it until we got to the first read-through. When I first received the script, I was obviously surprised that all these sequences that I knew nothing about were put into it. And I phoned him up, but he explained why he had done it, and I saw the validity of it. And of course, it makes for wonderful television, wonderful drama. The reason I was asked to do one of the scripts for the series was that I'd just written a play called Murder, Dear Watson, based on the characters, based on the return of Sherlock Holmes, in fact. And it had been on, and quite successful, with Edward Woodward, Keith Baxter and Dawn Adams. It was going to transfer to the West End. In fact, we were kind of prepared to go. I hadn't signed any contracts. But then Edward received an offer, which he couldn't refuse, of going to America to be starring in The Equalizer. And so that all collapsed. I'm not even sure that I still have a script of that show somewhere. I looked around for it recently. I'm retired now. I'm living down here in the south of France. And my various scripts that I've written are in boxes up in the attic. I had a look for it recently, but I couldn't find it, so perhaps it's gone forever. I am a comedy writer. I write situation comedy, and so when I took on the Holmes project for this play that I was writing, Murder, Dear Watson, there was a lot of humour in it. And I don't know whether that attracted them or not, but that's why they asked me to take on one of the episodes. I was delighted, of course, as well, to meet Eric Sykes, another fine comedy actor and great comedy writer. Gerald Campion, who plays the owner of the shop where all the busts originate, he, of course, was Billy Bunter when I was growing up. And indeed, Jerry, as he was known, had a drinking club, which I frequented when I was an actor in the West End with the Royal Shakespeare Company. Everybody went to Jerry's after the show. You'd meet everyone down there, because it was had a license that you had to join the club, of course, which I think was like threepence to get in. But you could drink all night, virtually. I mean, I never lasted all night, but I was there certainly to the wee small hours a couple of times. He, again, a very nice man, lovely host, very generous. The experience was a strange one, to have one script taken over in that way. But what was left of my script received very nice compliments. And I'm immensely proud to be part of this magnificent series. I don't see... I mean, the BBC were very wise when they came to do it again, to set it totally in today's world, rather than the world of Victorian England, because, again, Granada spent a fortune on that. The show looks so absolutely wonderful. There's no reason to do Sherlock Holmes in period ever again, as indeed there's no reason to do Poirot again after David Suchet. All those shows are absolutely superb and beautiful. And if they do Poirot, probably, well, I don't know, set it in space or something. Anyway, as I say, it's one of my proudest experiences, and I've just watched the show again. It's terrific. I'm very pleased to be associated with it, and I hope these few words that I'm offering will pass for an interview. Cheers.
Sincerest thanks, Mr. Kane. So with that, let's all enjoy a humbug. as we head over to the armchairs, where Luke awaits us for a discussion of this very special episode. To appease some insatiable lust, there's a man who apparently must. It disturbs poor Lestrade, even Holmes thinks it's odd. Keep destroying the Emperor's bust. This is not my favorite limerick from Mr. Asimov. The third and fourth lines are in parentheses, so really lines 1, 2, and 5 go together, but lines 3 and 4 are a bit of an aside, which, I don't know, I don't love.
I don't love it either.
Well, this one is weird, of course, too, because he pronounces it Lestrade,
Yeah.
rhyming with odd, and so that forces me to say Lestrade, which I don't like, even though I guess probably more people say it that way.
Stephen Fry says it that way, but because this is our series and it's Lestrade, it's always Lestrade to me.
Exactly.
I think you missed a trick.
Why?
Well, because I wrote one.
Oh.
See what you think of this.
Let's hear it. Yeah.
A crime of passion, an E-Day fix, an assassino in the mix. For a handshake he'd trade, solemn praise from Lestrade, and a smashed bust of Napoleon, or Six.
Nice. That's pretty good.
I have one more.
Yeah?
Because they're usually kind of naughty.
Yeah.
Close range peeping takes nerve. A bathing beauty hors d'oeuvre. His daughter gets smacked, his son winds up whacked, and Papa Vanucci's a perv.
Pretty good. Pretty good. I didn't know you had the limerick skill. Okay, well, we have quite a podcast today. Not to give too much away up front, but stay tuned because we're going to have some pretty incredible surprises coming as we go, including an appearance from a very special guest and a listener telegram from a certain Mr. Holmes that you won't want to miss. But yeah, for now, let's hop in.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual podcast, this was quite a challenging one to put together because on top of having already looked under the hood of this one once with director David Carson, there's also a lot of very heavy stuff happening with Jeremy Brett around this time. So yeah, I mean, this was one of the more difficult ones I've worked on so far. Also, again, surprisingly little in the books for this one. I think we got more from David Carson when we talked to him than all the books combined. So hopefully it still worked for folks.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I wrote down more notes than any other episode so far.
Well, let's start at the beginning then. Scene 1, Pietro Vanucci, played by Vincenzo Nicoli.
Yep.
Incredible performance. Maybe the most intensely angry performance of the entire series. Am I wrong? Is he over the top? What do you think?
Well, I think he's over the top, but I think it's great.
Yeah.
There's something over the top about just about every character in this episode, but somehow it's good.
Yeah.
With the exception of Watson, unfortunately. I think like Watson has to kind of keep it fairly level.
Yeah, well, Watson is always the straight man, so that's his job.
It's unfortunate for Edward Hardwicke, though, knowing what we know.
Yeah. But he got to have some fun in this one, so I think that's,
for sure.
That's pretty good. Speaking of these first scenes, I actually did a little research on these Italian sequences because I was very curious to know what was actually being yelled by Pietro and Lucrezia.
Yeah.
So I found a partial translation online, but I actually went onto Fiverr and I paid someone a few bucks to translate all of the Italian for me just to confirm it.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear what they were actually saying?
Yeah, I haven't heard this yet.
Well, fair warning, the language is a bit harsh.
Uh-oh.
So it may not be safe for work for the next 60 seconds, but here's what they are saying. So as it fades in off the window, Lucrezia says, "Oh, is it my fault, Pietro? I told you I loved him. I still love him. What can I do? I believed him with all my strength." Pietro says, "Bitch, you put our lives and our pride in his hands. You're worse than a whore. And you even dare to open your mouth and talk to me about your cowardice with pride?" Lucrezia says, "I loved him. I still love him with all my heart." Pietro slaps Lucrezia. Pietro says, "You spew poison and your mouth is full of mud." Lucrezia says, "Leave me alone. I wish I were with him right now." Pietro says, "You disgust me, whore." Lucrezia says, "My life is his. I love him." Pietro says, "Aren't you ashamed?" Lucrezia says, "No." Pietro says, "I'll kill you." Papa Vanucci says, "Pietro, cut it out." Pietro says, She dishonored us, and she's not ashamed of it. She's a whore. My sister's worse than a whore. She disgraced the family and me. That bastard violated her honor, and that of our family. And if you won't do anything, I'll see to it that the Venuccis get their revenge. Whore. Lucrezia says, No, Pietro, stop. Papa Venucci says, Lucrezia, come here. Lucrezia cries. Outside, Pietro yells in the street, Whore. Then to the coachman he says, Stop, take me to the Gelders, take me there. Then outside of Gelders, Pietro says, Hey, Beppo, you bastard, you cheated on my sister. You made my sister a whore. You trampled on her honor and that of our family. I want what's ours. I want my pride. Come on, you bastard. Beppo holds up his knife. His cousin says, Beppo, what are you doing with that knife? Come here. The fight starts. Pietro says, Give me what is mine. Then after Pietro gets stabbed and he runs inside, Herr Mendelsham says, What are you doing down there, Beppo? And Beppo says, Bastard, traitor, you'll pay dearly for this, because he exposes him to the cops.
Mm-hmm.
Then when Beppo starts throwing plaster busts, he yells at the owner, Pig, calls him a pig. Then when they finally break him out, what he's yelling is, I'll kill you, and he starts laughing. So that's all of that. Then later on, there's a sequence where Papa Venucci takes the gun from Lucrezia.
Yeah.
And she says no, and he says, These are not things for women. And Lucrezia says, I disgraced the family. I have to do it myself. And Papa Venucci says, I'm the head of the family. It's my duty. And she says, Dad. And they walk away. That's interesting there because, we'll come back to that, but she was planning to go get revenge. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Then at the very end, when Holmes is out talking to Papa Venucci in the carriage, he says, Good morning. And then it's kind of cut because, it comes and goes. The camera cuts in and out.
Right.
But he says, cases like these, and then we cut to Watson, and then it comes back, and Holmes says, it's important. And then Papa Venucci says, Here you are, Mr. Holmes. And then Mr. Holmes says, Thank you. And then the only other line that gets translated is at the very end when Papa Venucci says, Lucrezia, it's over. And so that is the entire Italian script of the Six Napoleons translated for you.
Nice. Well, that's a mystery of its own.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing about this. It's about 6 minutes of what appears to be an Italian language movie until we get the opening credits.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting to me. Like, I wonder what people watching it, when it came on, what they were thinking about that whole sequence.
Yeah, I wonder if there was ever any concern about that.
No subtitles.
Yeah, exactly.
Even on BritBox, the only subtitle that comes up is Assassino.
I've always been curious to know, too, if this was written by someone, because, we talked to David Carson, and he told us that these scenes were added, that John Kane, that the writer really had no input. So were they improv'd by the actors? Was there a script?
Yeah.
Because it hints at things, knowing the translation now, but it still doesn't spill anything really significant.
No, but that's a good point, because like Pietro, or I should say the actor playing Pietro and the actor playing Beppo, they both seem like they're from the stage, from musicals, from operas even.
Yeah, and they are, yeah.
Oh, okay, well, then they're pretty comfortable with this kind of thing.
Right.
And so wouldn't surprise me if they just said, go nuts.
Right, yeah. Oh, and one other translation note, the short line that Herr Mendelsham says when Holmes tells him that Beppo's out of jail, he says, Ach du lieber Gott, which translates to, oh dear God. That one I just used Google Translate on my phone and held it up to the speaker.
Nice.
Well, moving on, or I guess backwards a little bit, my next note has to do with Beppo's cartwheel during the fight scene.
Well, yeah.
Because I'm wondering if that was in the script or, if it's just very, very reminiscent in a sense of the footwork that Jeremy does in The Solitary Cyclist,
For
where
sure.
everybody's like, oohs and ahs,
I think I have to say this is probably, maybe not even probably, I think this is the best fight choreography of the entire series.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's a knife fight at that. Something could go really easily go wrong or look bad.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of cuts and a lot of swirling camera moves. And the actors really go for it. And it's like, it really makes that work.
Yeah.
And the fact that like Beppo, who's like a bit of a maniac, doing cartwheels in the middle of a knife fight, it's just, it just feels like a really classic scene. Again, it felt like a musical or something to me.
Well, and we have said, was it Abbey Grange that we said that was the best fight scene in the series?
That was some of the best up until then.
Right. Yeah.
Which was like 2 swings.
Right.
And this is like a big fight scene, and Pietro takes a knife to the goop in the end of it, and it's like, I don't know, it's got to be the best fight scene.
Yeah,
it has to be
for sure.
And then Beppo runs into Gelder's shop to hide, and I've noticed that there's a lot of Napoleon busts in there, but this time I paused it, And at one point, you can see like 100 or 200 of these busts in there. They're just all over the shop in the background, up in the rafters.
Yeah.
I've never noticed it before.
Well, after this sequence, we find ourselves at Baker Street. I love everything about this shot, this moment. It's Lestrade's kind of nothing in particular, the way he looks at Holmes, searching for a response, doesn't get one, shakes it off, sighs, it's just the little tiny moments that these three give us in this moment. It's better acting than you see in most movies these days.
And Lestrade is just like slumped in the settee.
Yeah.
And Watson's sprawled out with a cup of brandy and a cigar.
And then Holmes lowering the paper and chuckling, and it's a unique moment in the series, and it's just the way the camera moves and everything that happens. It's really masterful. And honestly, too, the music here, I really like this music cue. If you listen closely, it's a sequence that it's very different than any cue we've heard up to this point.
That goes for the whole episode. This is like one of those episodes where there's so much good in it that you don't always notice all of it.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I always feel like the music is like not stock music, but like existing music.
Yeah.
But to know that it's Patrick Gower's like, modifying themes to sound a little Italian, to sound a little like this. This episode is a great example of that. The way that he blends things together. It's great.
And I think the Vannucci theme is really the only one that's on the score soundtrack. But man, I wish so much of this music was on that soundtrack. It's such good stuff. So much good music.
Yeah.
And Jeremy has a nice little moment with a propelling pencil here.
Exquisitely small propelling pencil.
I was wondering about that. I was wondering if it was a small pencil or if maybe his hands were bigger than we thought.
He does have big hands, and he does seem like he has maybe some clubbing in his fingers, but that's a tiny one. They do make, there's different sizes of those, but that's a little tiny one.
Yeah.
Some of those even like went on like your watch chain. They had a little ring for those.
Yeah.
There's a nice little edit, which I'm sure you noticed, but when we're looking at the exterior of Morse Hudson's shop, and then we go into the interior, the camera moves towards the door and we see a curtain, and then there's a little cut as the door begins to open and an arm pulls back a curtain from the other side of the door.
Yeah.
And then we're in the interior. It's almost unnecessary, and I think most people wouldn't even understand the need for it, but it's as if the camera in that moment is Beppo, like we're in Beppo vision.
Yeah.
And getting the camera from the bright light of the street to the dimmer interior means, different lighting needs and stuff like that. But if you're not looking for it, you don't notice it. But it's pretty nifty, a little effect there.
No,
I think.
it's very sharp, very polished sequence.
And it reminded me of that crane shot into the window of Baker Street on Resident Patient.
Exactly, yeah.
Also David Carson.
Great stuff. Let's talk just a moment about the scene with Eric Sykes, a.k.a. Mr. Harker. We've talked about it before, how Jeremy was very generous when it came to giving other actors their moment in the sun. The moment with Captain Croker comes to mind. But what's funny is, not being British, I will admit that before talking to David Carson, I really didn't know who Eric Sykes was.
Me either.
And now we know that he's nearly a household name in England. But to us Americans, he just seemed like another great character actor that the Granada group cast in the show. And I never noticed anything off about this scene in the 100 times I'd seen it before. But now that we know that Mr. Sykes was both deaf and mostly blind and a superstar on top of it.
For comedy, though, too.
Right. Watching Jeremy's performance here kind of takes on a different tone for me. I feel like he's intentionally really dialing himself back, as if to let Eric Sykes shine a little more here. I'm not sure. What do you think? I mean, there could be another explanation, which maybe we'll come back to, but I feel like in this scene, Jeremy is just a bit less, I don't know the word, intense than he normally is. Am I crazy?
No, I think it's fair, and I think it kind of reminds me of an episode we haven't touched on yet, but with Freddie Jones.
Yeah, letting him have his moment kind of a thing?
Well, knowing that there's another veteran on set almost even,
sure.
and kind of going, I don't need to step all over this guy. He's going to carry the scene. I don't need to do it.
Yeah.
Also props to Eric Sykes, because the description of his character in the book is exceedingly unkempt and agitated elderly man.
Yeah. And but the problem with knowing too much about these episodes also is, now that I know that Jeremy was on the verge of a major kind of breakdown, made me watch this episode kind of through a different lens, and it made me start to wonder if I was seeing things that weren't there, and I'll come back to this, but it's like during the course of this episode, I feel like there's a number of times where Jeremy just seems a little more subdued than usual, than really kind of any time up till now. But again, in those moments, he's almost always playing off of someone who's a guest star who's famous, so it's hard to know.
That's what I was going to ask you. Was it that, or did it feel the opposite way? Like almost like a vacation from it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he's a little short with people in this episode, but like we said, like a lot of people are over the top in this episode. So he doesn't need to match them, and actually kind of being short with them does match him in a way.
Yes.
Because he can be very Sherlockian in that way and kind of cut them off. But like, I don't know, to me, it felt like he's, I mean, it's some of my favorite performances in this episode. So I guess I didn't feel it that way.
Yeah. There's another great music cue here when Sykes is in his flashback and he hears the scream, and the music kind of takes on this horrific, almost psycho stringy feeling. And then when he falls on the body, the strings squeak and bend. And again, it's just like, it's a very different choice for Patrick Gowers, very different than really any other episode, which I really like it. And again, I wish this music was on the CD.
I mean, it's kind of a stylized scene too, The cop is there and they kind of pause, they freeze at the end of it, but it's like, it's kind of stylized, and all those little mannerisms from Eric Sykes, all the twitches, and like the way he has to like stop himself from puking or screaming when he finds the body. And, I was thinking about it as like definitely a good tip here, listeners. If you ever come across a body in your home, definitely roll all over it and handle the murder weapon with both hands and hope that there's a cop watching. Yeah.
And what's funny is, that never really went anywhere. So kind of a red herring.
Yeah. I should say, just before we exit the Eric Sykes scene, something I noticed, we have to talk about. My favorite brown Homburg is back.
Oh.
And Watson's got his lovely brown bowler as well. But I couldn't swear to it, but in this scene with Horace Harker, you can see the inside of his hat, of Jeremy's hat.
Yeah.
And it looks a little bit like a vintage Homburg that I just picked up, which is a Knox, like a 40s Knox Homburg.
Yeah.
And it kind of has that same reddish grosgrain ribbon on the brim. And I kind of wondered if it's the same kind of hat. Still don't have an answer to that, but.
Well, unfortunately, we don't, no one seems to have kept track of the hats very well.
Yeah. We'll find out eventually.
Another masterful composition here when they're walking to the street and Lestrade says, "Why choose this house?" And just as the camera passes the for sale sign on the house, that's when Watson says,
"Yep."
He has the epiphany of because it's for sale. I just found that camera move really fun. Yeah, perfectly done.
But can I say one thing that's not perfect?
Yeah.
I feel like it was such a perfectly timed thing, and I wondered if maybe somebody took a step too early or something, because I think the camera was meant to stay panning to the left a little bit, but we go to the right and you can see two cars down the street.
Oh, really? I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'll have to look for that.
It was such a carefully planned shot. I'm sure everybody was just like,
True. Yeah, I'll have to look for that. I never noticed it, though I did go back and watch The Dancing Men recently, and I did notice some cars in the background in the final shot of that one. So
yeah, I mean, for as many times as we watched it, that's hardly a strike against it,
Right, exactly.
Again, this is just one of those scenes that I love, the scene where Watson and Lestrade are kind of doing their own detective work with Holmes just standing in the background.
Yeah.
He's like, "Why did you choose this house?" And he's like, "The lamp." He's like, "By Jove, you're right."
Yeah. I have to say, I mean, when I was trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel for potential bad things to talk about,
yeah.
I mean, there's a little bit of maybe just a little too much puffed out chest by Watson, maybe just a little too much cuteness here. I mean, when you're talking about a nearly perfect episode, what are you going to find that's bad about it? There's hardly anything, but I don't know. It's kind of bordering on the edge of a little too much camp. It's still so wonderful. What can you say?
It is there a little bit, but to my earlier point, like I feel like it's almost like they had to give Watson some stuff to do.
Yeah.
Some funny stuff, I mean, and I feel like this was one of those moments. And it's in the story where he says, the lamp, and he gets it wrong, but
yeah, no, for sure.
It's still funny. And they puff it up a little bit, but I like it. I don't know. It makes me laugh.
Yeah. So here's a question for you. In the morgue, Pietro's ear. Did you notice this?
Yes.
I was trying to figure out what this is. It looks like he has cotton in his ear, but the first time I saw it, I thought maybe he had like a little bit of cauliflower ear going on because he was a tough guy. But later in the wide shot, when Holmes and the gang are there, it seems to be gone.
Well, I ran it back. He's got it in his ear and his nose.
Okay.
And so I wonder if they were like kind of stuffing him and smells get out.
Yeah, okay.
And when they pull off the sheet, his mouth bubbles a little bit. And I wondered if maybe they put cotton in his mouth too or something.
Interesting.
But in that moment, you might have been stuck on the cotton. but there's a really close-up of that really nasty gash on his neck.
Yeah.
And it's the only moment you get to see it, but it's like scabby and yellow and gross. It's pretty great makeup.
Yeah, it's interesting makeup. I mean, it seems a little strange. Like, would a knife make a gash of that kind? I mean, it's like something tore his throat out.
But in a scuffle.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you. Why do you think he was checking Pietro's fingers in this scene? He kind of pries his arm up and he really contorts it to look at his fingers.
Well, yeah, I think he was just looking to see, like, if he scratched the other guy, if there was, evidence of skin under there or something. But this is actually maybe my only other bad note that I have, which was the attempted rigor mortis acting of Pietro Venucci's arm. I mean, it's hard to call it bad, but it was clearly that Jeremy was doing his best to act like the arm was stiff when he was examining it. I don't know. It's a nitpick, but
that's a nitpick. But it's almost like he also didn't need to pry it up off the table. You could have just looked at it.
Yeah.
But I think it was like a Jeremy thing. Like, let's pry this guy's arm up and have a little glance.
Yeah, for sure. There's a really great moment, which again is starkly contrasted, I think, to what I was saying earlier about Jeremy being a little on the subdued side. And I'm referring to the ha-hey moment when he sees the paper when they're walking back.
Yeah.
But to me, what makes this scene so great is Watson's face, because he's like, what? What's happening?
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that is when I was really checking the cut of that moment, I had it on pause and I was going frame by frame. I noticed something kind of cool. In the first few frames of that shot, when they're walking, they're passing a window on Baker Street, and the window belongs to a Charles Rain, R-E-I-N, and his business is aurist and acoustic instrument maker. And that alone is pretty cool. And maybe this can be seen in other episodes and I just noticed it here, I'm not sure. But what makes it even cooler is that this was a real guy. I Googled it, and his shop was actually in the Strand area, but he made ear trumpets and other hearing aid devices, as well as a chair, or a throne it was called, that acted like a large sound receiver for deaf people, and it channeled sound through pipes into the ears. And so he made things like that, but they weren't for common folk. He actually made them for kings and dukes and very wealthy people that were hard of hearing. So I just found it really fun that the set designers actually made a real...
Yeah, no, that's neat. I actually really wonder what that chair looks like now.
Yeah.
I mean, do the pipes go throughout the house, or is it just like there's pipes in this room and it just kind of siphons it?
Well, I'll send you the article and we can post a photo, because there is a photo of the chair in this article.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I think it's more like, it's not that the pipes collect sound, it's that the chair itself acts as a conductor. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure how solid the science really was on this.
Yeah.
But I think the article I found was in a blog that was dedicated to kind of antique sound equipment, that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it'd be interesting to see it. I think we have to talk about Lestrade in this episode.
Yeah.
Colin Jevons. I mean, I think this is probably his finest performance in the series.
Yeah, for sure.
He gets a lot to do. He gets to be funny. He gets to be a little slow behind Holmes, but he's also like tenacious in his police work, in tracking down Pietro's identity, solving that part of the mystery himself.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, perhaps the most moving scene of the series at the end of this with Holmes. But
yeah.
I mean, Colin Jevons, man.
But there's so many great moments when Holmes is telling him, no, I think we'll find him in Chiswick. And Lestrade is just shaking his head.
Dumbstruck.
Yeah, he's lost. It's so perfect. It's so
He's
good.
like lost and like bewildered and like confused why Holmes is just stuck on this.
Yeah. Well, and eventually they find themselves camping out. Again, so many good moments. Don't suppose we can smoke, can we? No, thought as much.
Yeah, that scene, it's like he's like an indignant child asking his dad that question.
Yeah.
Don't suppose we can have dessert, can we? Like, nope. Didn't think so.
Well, what's funny about that is then, Watson offers him a humbug. And I thought it was kind of funny because it seems like a lot of people don't know what humbugs are in America. So for those who don't, it's quite simply just a hard peppermint candy.
Yeah, and if you look at Watson, he's got like a huge one in his mouth.
Yeah. Well, again, jumping ahead, Mr. Sanderford brings the bust and Holmes buys it. And then we have the big reveal. And, what can be said about it that hasn't been said? It's perfect Jeremy. The combination of his matter-of-factness and the showmanship of pulling the tablecloth and breaking the bust and everything. I mean, it's one of the greatest moments in the series. I mean, we could talk about it forever, but I feel like we already have.
Yeah, but there's always things to find about it too, because like when he's laying it all out and then he goes up to the mantelpiece to grab the bust, he like parts Watson and Lestrade with his hands, and then just kind of cradles the bust back over.
And you get so used to how great Jeremy Brett is, but Edward Hardwicke is actually, I love his bravo here. I love it when he's like, bravo! He's so excited, like he can't even contain it. His voice goes up an octave.
And that's kind of how the moment in the book was. Like, we started clapping. We didn't even realize we were clapping. And it was like, that kind of spontaneity really comes across in his performance.
Yeah.
I think, speaking of performances, just very briefly, Mr. Sandiford, how do you do?
And then the part where Jeremy's like, my wife says I look like Napoleon, and he says, no.
Just barely vocalizes it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a nice little scene. I mean, there's so many, like, Mr. Josiah Brown, like his little scene, oh dear, it's smashed.
Yeah.
It could have gone too far.
Yeah.
But it's like, it just doesn't go quite too far. And like Mr. Sandiford's just great. Just great directing.
Yeah, and all these characters in this one in particular, it kind of harkens back to the Red-Headed League and its lightheartedness, but more than anything, this episode feels very like Dickensian to me, very Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
There's all these like kind of bubbly characters. They're all just so fun, but none of them overstay their welcome, which I think is the hallmark of a good directing.
And like Holmes also just shoves them out the door, but like it reminded me of something David Carson said in our interview with him. He referred to these things as movies, not episodes. When you get to his episodes, you can see why, because there's like filmic framing and camera moves and characters.
Right.
They do stand out. And there's all these little Carsonian intro scenes.
Yeah.
The whole Atlantic City scene at the beginning of this one, the Blue Carbuncle scene where it's all the flashbacks of where the carbuncle was.
The dream sequence in Resident Patient, yeah.
Yeah, and then the flashback scene in Musgrave Ritual. They're almost fictional in their own fictional story. Like these weird little asides that set up the episode. They're great.
Yeah. Well, we got to talk for a moment about the tears.
Yeah.
I never noticed something until the most recent viewings. We heard from David Carson on this, and we heard from Jeremy in his own words, but the final close-up shot of Jeremy, just as he walks off to let Lestrade out, there actually is a very big tear just balancing on his eyelid there.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that is that in all the previous close-up shots, his eyes are clearly welling up with tears, but in that very final one, his eyes are mostly dry, but for that big tear that's very much there. So it's probably a different take, I guess is what I'm getting at. But it's only there for a moment, and it's just when he goes.
Yeah.
But it's a big tear.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that thing didn't fall off.
Yeah, I don't know. That scene, I mean, Lestrade can't help but admit he was wrong, but it's the way Colin Jevons expresses it with magnanimity and pride that makes this scene. It's like I hold my breath as that scene goes on, just because it's just such great acting and it's great delivery and performances on all sides. And then Sherlock kind of like shouts to Watson about the Conk Silverton forgery case to like break the tension almost.
Well, and it's also fun that the next thing he does is play his own theme music.
Yeah.
I really, it's kind of hard to tell there if this was intentional or if Patrick Gowers just kind of made it happen. Because it seems hard to believe that Jeremy would have been like, I'm going to go ahead and play the theme song to the show.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's Patrick Gowers was able to make it work. So maybe subconsciously Jeremy was just playing something and Patrick put the music in. I don't know. He seems to be bowing the notes to the theme. So it's hard to say.
I think it would be way more noticeable if he was trying to play a different song.
Sure.
But again, to Patrick Gowers, the way he like modulates the theme into an Italian theme to end the episode for the death notice of Beppo and the rain.
Yeah.
All the aspects of these different multiple stories and actors and the music, they all come together in that moment. It's like just perfect ending.
Yeah. You mentioned the death certificate. It's interesting that they chose to give Beppo a last name here.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they had to, in order to issue a death certificate.
To kill him.
But I wonder why they chose the name they did, Cicciolini.
Or Cicciolini. I don't know how to say it.
But more than that, it's funny because they wrote it twice. It's kind of like they knew it was going to be hard to read the handwriting in low-def 1980s television, so they wrote it bigger next to it so the audience would be sure to catch what it was.
This would be a question for David Carson.
Yeah.
This is like one of those moments where you almost assume it means something to the director or the writer. Like maybe it's a nod to another movie, but in the story, they make a point of the fact that Beppo doesn't have a last name. And there's even annotations in the books about like, how could he work somewhere and they don't even know his last name?
Right.
There's that scene where Mendelssohn says, Beppo, yes. His second name I never knew. That always makes me kind of laugh.
Yeah, it's definitely strange. But hey, they kept to the story until the very last moment.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the books for a moment. This one was first published in Collier's Weekly, April of 1904, and in The Strand in May of that same year. There is one annotation I found interesting in the Klinger book. He mentions a piece called Walks in London by August J.C. Hare, where the author describes the area of town where the first busts were smashed as the very location of the Bethlehem Hospital, also known as Bedlam, very famous insane asylum that's been around since the times of Sir Thomas More. So Lestrade's assumption that it is a case of insanity, it wasn't just out of the blue. Many readers of the day would have known that legendary hospital was in the area, so it would have been a very reasonable assumption in some ways.
You know, that's a good point, though, too, because when they arrest Beppo, they've got a straitjacket, like, waiting for him.
Yeah.
Maybe he had a prior history, and we just don't know about it, but it just seemed like they probably don't travel with those. But if it was meant to be that they were right next to Bedlam, maybe.
True. I just also got the sense that he was just so unruly when they tried to pull him out of that drawing room that they were like, handcuffs ain't going to cut it. But whether or not they would have a straitjacket on hand.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of annotations, just briefly, there's another, in air quotes, interesting hypothesis that Horace Harker is actually Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, I saw that one.
And that Morse Hudson is the estranged husband of Mrs. Hudson?
Yeah. I saw those and I just basically skipped over them.
I kind of feel like it's great that people have time to research these trifles.
Yeah.
And if you want them, they're there.
One other difference in the show, they make a clear line of how Beppo got a hold of the pearl. But in the story, Holmes just says, well, I'll just read it. He says, he may have stolen it from Pietro. He may have been Pietro's confederate. He may have been the go-between of Pietro and his sister. It is of no consequence to us, which is the correct solution. I just found it interesting that the show writers decided that it did matter, and they kind of drew a straight line.
Yeah, I think that, they made things a little more concrete.
Yeah.
I would say they're improvements, especially if you're translating it to the screen. I mean, I think a lot of things in the stories, you kind of go, well, we don't know, we don't need to know. But when you're playing them out, I think giving people motivations makes sense. So I think they're all good changes.
Yeah, and Jeremy said that himself at one point. He was like, once you bring something off the page and put it into people's mouths and in front of the cameras, you find that things aren't exactly what you thought they were going to be. So,
speaking of that, like I was referencing IMDb a lot for this one, just getting characters' names and actors' names. And there was reviews for this episode. It was 7.5 was the rating, I think. And people had written reviews. So I was like, oh, let's see what they said. And most of them were like 10 stars or whatever. But then I read these reviews and it was like, I don't like that they added all this mafia stuff to it. Explains too much. But it's like one of the best episodes of the series. 5 stars.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
That's what people do.
Yeah.
And again, though, this one sticks, frankly, quite well to the story other than that little mafia thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even the ending, which I think some people assume was manufactured for the television version, it's very much in the book. I think I'm actually just going to read the segment from the very end.
Yeah.
Conan Doyle wrote, "Well," said Lestrade, "I've seen you handle a good many cases, Mr. Holmes, but I don't know that I ever knew a more workmanlike one than this. We're not jealous of you at Scotland Yard. No, sir. We're very proud of you. And if you come down tomorrow, there's not a man from the oldest inspector to the youngest constable who wouldn't be glad to shake you by the hand." "Thank you," said Holmes. "Thank you." And as he turned away, it seemed that he was more nearly moved by the softer human emotions than I had ever seen him. So yeah, almost straight from the story, though one interesting aside, in the Oxford Annotated Edition, it clarified that the original manuscript had Lestrade saying, "We're damned proud of you." But it had to be changed because of George Nunes, the publisher of The Strand, was enforcing some pretty strict rules about uncouth language, so they couldn't say damned. So he just says, "We're very proud of you." I can't remember what he says in the show. Does he say very? Or he just says, "We're proud of you"?
No, he just says, "We're proud of you."
Yeah.
And actually, as I reread it, I think it's better coming from an actor just to say proud of you, because that's the line that gets it for me. because he's coming over there and he's telling him, you're doing a great job, but he's like, we're proud of you.
Yeah.
It just sounds like he's like a father figure in that moment. But if you were to say like, we're very proud of you, it sounds like a little throwaway-ish to me.
I agree. I think that would be bad, but I wonder if damned proud would have been better.
Yeah.
You imagine Colin Jevons going, we're damned proud of you, Mr. Holmes.
It could go either way, but it's just the way he did it on the day was perfect. So
yeah.
I wonder if maybe they did a few takes and this one just rung out a little better. But to me, it works. To me, it's perfect.
Well, and here again, like the blue carbuncle, it seems to be implied that since Holmes was the one who found the pearl, Holmes just decides to keep the treasure for himself.
Yeah.
That's what I always assumed, but I suppose that's just because they don't address it. It doesn't really imply anything, but this has come up before because Martin Dakin actually addresses this in his book, A Sherlock Holmes Companion, and I was just going to read a little snippet, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
He writes, Mr. Harbottle, who was apparently a writer in a Sherlock Holmes journal, accuses Holmes of dishonesty in putting the pearl in his safe after buying the bust from Mr. Sandiford and making him sign a paper relinquishing all his rights in it. The accusation is a worthless one. Holmes was only securing the gem in a safe place until he could return it to its owner, as he did with the blue carbuncle. He could not have possibly annexed it without the knowledge of Watson, let alone Lestrade. To get Mr. Sandiford to sign the paper was certainly needlessly fussy, since he could not in any case retain any right to stolen property. Holmes could have, of course, told him that the pearl was there and got his permission to break the bust, but then what would have become of the dramatic climax and the applause that so pleased him? If this seems dearly bought at £10, reflect that he would have no difficulty in touching the Prince of Colonna for this as expenses. Surprisingly enough, Colonna really is a place in Greece. So,
yeah,
I guess it's silly to think that Holmes would keep it. I don't know.
I mean, there's a couple of instances like that in this episode, too. He just keeps the photograph from Lestrade.
Right.
But, he's not just some guy off the street. He's a consulting detective. Like, if it was a private detective and he found the stone, I don't know that he's obliged to hand it over to the police. He would just return it.
Yeah, true enough.
And obviously, he actually does consult with the police, so I think that's fair. I think it just kind of sounds like, stick it in the safe, Watson.
Yeah, I guess it's never said what happens later, but I just always thought, why go to the trouble of buying the bust in front of witnesses and all that,
I think it's like if it came out in the newspaper that there was the gem was hiding in there, then that guy would go, well, that was mine.
Sure.
Covering your tracks.
Okay, well, let's take a moment to recap the good, the bad, and the Jeremy. Once again, not going to be much bad to talk about here. We've already covered so much good, but anything great we haven't touched on?
Well, yeah, we skipped over a couple characters. Morse Hudson.
Sure.
Who, let me see, in the book, it says he was a small, stout man with a red face and a peppery manner. And Gerald Campion, I think, fulfills that to the T.
Yeah, perfectly.
He's like repeating every question that's asked before answering. You're responsible for the breakages? Like, and it's interesting because in the story, you don't even hear Holmes or Watson. It's just that guy's side of the answering. So he actually kind of does do that. So I thought it was a nice touch that they put that in the episode.
For sure. And I could see them thinking of him because he famously played Billy Bunter, which for people who don't know, it was a schoolboy character in a television show back in the 50s, 60s. But he was like 30 years old when he started playing that role because his face was so round and so, like youthful looking. He actually played that role for like 10 years. So very, very youthful looking face. And you can kind of see it under his mustache and his gray hair.
Yeah.
Very good casting.
And very expressive, and the thing about, warn Gelder about the conspiracy, because with all the busts they have on the premises, the Red Republicans could have a field day. And then Holmes like tapping his lips, like, like in agreement with him.
Yeah.
There's just so many good little moments. Like, it's basically all good moments.
Well, and honestly, I didn't really make a note of every actor. I just kind of said, good note, all the supporting actors.
Well, that's what I mean. Like Herr Mendelschnum.
Yeah.
Another animated character, sing-songy with his delivery, but it's like German. It's like, and he shows him the photo of Bepper. He's like, oh, the rascal.
But again, he was a semi-recognized actor at the time, which this seems to be one of the first ones where the casting department kind of said, hey, we're a hugely successful show. Let's get recognizable talent in all these little parts.
Yeah.
It's hard to know, but it seems like every single actor in this really is incredible. and most of them are, Marina Sirtis, obviously, this was like one of her first things, but, everybody shines.
That's kind of where we're at like a detriment, I think, because we didn't grow up with the stuff that these people were in.
Yeah.
And so we watched this show and we're like, man, that guy was great.
Yeah.
Like, where'd they find him? And it's like, yeah, he's a huge actor.
See, I prefer it that way, though, because I think it would be distracting, frankly, if all of a sudden Michael Shannon showed up in an episode. You know what I mean? I'd be like, what?
It probably is distracting.
Yeah.
Because, David, our producer, was telling us about Eric Sykes and how big of a comic actor he was. Like, imagine if it was like Chevy Chase was in this.
But I think the difference between pretty much any American actor and any British actor is the British actors generally have had the training and the stage experience, and, they're frankly more likely to be amazing than Chevy Chase.
You don't think Chevy Chase could pull off Holmes?
I'd be surprised if he hasn't tried.
We love you, Chevy.
Another good moment I have is just the quite ridiculous, frankly, moment when Holmes and Watson, they're watching Lestrade sneaking a peek of the case files.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they come in, they're doing a very grumble, grumble,
Yeah.
I mean, every time I hear it, I try to rerun it and listen to if they're even saying real words. It just literally feels like they're going blum, 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 blum when they come in.
Yeah.
But it's just so fun. And it's made even better by their big smiles.
In the really weird way, he like picks up the file and like, I see what you're looking. Yeah, it's bizarre.
It's fun.
But speaking of funny and kind of bizarre, Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade, when they're tracking Beppo, and their three heads pop up behind the hedge.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Is that who you're expecting?" It's like, his name's Beppo. And then Lestrade like snorts.
Yeah.
Good name for a monkey. Just another good moment.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Jeremy like really jumps before he tackles Beppo.
Yeah.
In the story, it says like, with the bound of a tiger, Holmes was on his back.
Well, you can tell Jeremy read that line because he had his teeth out.
Exactly.
That was great. Well, let's talk about the bad. I mean, I've already pretty much mentioned everything that was on my bad list, and none of it was all that bad. I think the cars you mentioned were certainly, that has to be the worst thing. But anything else on your bad list?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking for something negative to say just so we didn't seem congratulatory all the way through it, So the very last shot of the whole episode, when the carriage is pulling into the Nucci compound, I guess.
Yeah.
The carriage is like, it's very high gloss.
Yeah.
And there's windows. And if you look very, very carefully, right as it turns in, you can kind of see the dolly track on the ground.
Yeah.
Hardly egregious, but it's what we're paid to look for.
Well, what's funny too is though I noticed that high gloss carriage, but what I noticed is when Holmes is out there talking to Papa Vanucci, the shot is very tight. And so you can't really see that there's very much activity happening on Baker Street, but there is, because you can see it in the reflections of the carriage. And it's just kind of great that they took the time to actually have extras walking back and forth and doing all that stuff, because you can't see it except for in the reflections. But it goes both ways, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, some of my notes are more like questions because, I wrote down, did Lestrade really think that the breaking of the bus is what led to Beppo's assassination from the mafia?
Well, he's Lestrade.
He's Lestrade. That, and then Mrs. Hudson. She's not in this one.
Yeah.
But he's calling for her, and I thought, like, it was a nice touch, but it was like, I wish she would have been in it. But then again, what would she have done? There's so many guest stars on this episode.
Maybe she was out sick that day. Well, let's talk about the Jeremy moments. I mean, we've talked about so many, and there are so many, but the look he gives Watson when they're talking about the E-Day fix.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh my gosh, that won't do, Watson.
I think that's the thing, is it's like a lot of the Jeremy moments from this episode are just looks or like single words.
Yeah.
Like mine was when he says the dreadful business of the Abernethy family. The actual subtitles say Holmes barks and says, woo.
Yeah.
That's it. He did bark and went, woo.
Yeah. I have to say, I think probably one of my favorite moments in this one is when Watson is explaining about the butter and the parsley, and Lestrade says, ah, and Holmes goes, ah, sarcastically, like
mocking him.
Yeah, like you didn't think of that.
Exactly.
But then he gives him a devilish grin to kind of smooth it out after the fact. I don't know. It's a top moment in my book. It's such a small moment, but that like sums up Jeremy Brett's Sherlock Holmes.
It does. And it does make me wonder about kind of what you were saying, like knowing what he was going through. Like, was he being a little extra snarky in this episode?
Yeah.
The scene with Morse Hudson kind of reminded me of the scene with Dr. Huxtable in Priory School when he asks, are you familiar with the great artiste oeuvre? And he just goes, yes, indeed. Do you recognize the man in this photograph?
Yeah. And I love it how he leaves his walking stick on the feet of dead Pietro in the morgue.
Yeah.
He just lays his stick on the body. It was just kind of funny.
Well, he's dead now, so we can put stuff on him, I guess.
You mentioned Mrs. Hudson, but I mean, again, when he's calling for her, Mrs. Hudson, Mrs. Hudson.
Mm-hmm.
Just very musical, it's wonderful.
The whole episode is like sing-songy. It's kind of like you said, like Dickensian in that way.
Yeah.
The scene where Holmes, he's standing on a chair and he's throwing papers all over the floor. I was thinking, like, why would anyone do this? But I always love these moments.
Yeah.
But, he's standing there and he's got his vest on or his waistcoat. But directly after that scene, if you really pay attention, he gets off the chair, he exits the room, and we kind of pull back and pan down and we see Watson and Lestrade sleeping. In less than 9 seconds, I timed it,
Yeah.
less than 9 seconds, he puts on his coat, his winter jacket, his scarf, his hat, and he picks up the hats, the jackets, and scarves for Lestrade and Watson and re-enters the room and re-enters frame.
Yeah.
It's so fast.
Yeah.
I've never even thought to even notice it, except for this time around. And I thought, like, there had to be 4 people standing in the hallway dressing him that quickly. It's like needless, but it's great.
Well, what's funny is I have always noticed that moment, and I've always imagined those little pixies out there loading him up with his costume pieces.
There's a bit of wood. I don't remember if it was the door or not, but it's like a really glossy bit of wood. And you can see him like basically just put his arms straight out at one point in the reflection. And it's like they must have just been like, here we go, do it.
Yeah, it's movie magic, and it's great.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's come to the vote. Persian Slippers.
Yeah.
This one is frankly more ceremonial than anything. I kind of feel like we've already made our thoughts pretty clear on this one, but I'll go ahead and go first. I went into this one assuming I was going to give it a straight 10, but I wavered from that a bit when I started to question those few moments I mentioned, and, the use of all the guest stars, the comedy elements, the moments where Jeremy seemed to be less than completely present as he has been. I was worried, but after really watching it, and I think discovering that Jeremy was in fact, I think, subduing himself a tad for the consideration of other actors, and I don't know for a fact that's what happened, but I believe it is. And really just that this episode is attempting to be something quite different from the other episodes. It's trying to be a gentler show for the purposes, as David Carson said, of really showcasing the relationships between Lestrade and our heroes. And I think they did exactly what they set out to do. And while, to me, the more I watch it, I feel like I sense this unevenness with Jeremy and his ups and downs. But again, knowing what he's about to go through, I wonder if that's part of it. But you just can't get away from the fact that it includes some of the very greatest moments, and perhaps maybe the greatest moment in the entire series. So I'm giving it 10 full slippers.
Okay. I think you kind of meandered around it a little bit there, and I wasn't sure where you were going with that. I think to just meander in a different direction, I think I kind of felt the opposite about most of those things. Like, I came into this episode thinking, I really like this episode. I like the fact that there's, maybe to me the coolest prop in the series, the thing that I want the most, the Napoleon bust.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's all this kind of comedy moments, which I enjoy, generally. And then the over the top Pietro scenes, which now we know he's screaming horror at the top of his lungs.
Right.
It's a very bizarre episode to me, but it does everything I want the show to do. There's these soft moments, these kind moments between Watson and Holmes and Lestrade. There's action moments, there's choreography, there's very cinematic shots, and there's actually a mystery.
Yeah.
This episode, more than most of them, when I think about the Solitary Cyclist, which was another one of our very favorites, somebody's following a girl on a bike and she doesn't just go, "Who are you?" But this one, there's a very deliberate mystery, and we actually follow it from the very beginning to the very end, and we solve it. And to me, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But in the bottom of the 10th one, there is hidden a little black pearl, putting it just over the edge. I think this might be my very favorite episode.
Really?
And I didn't think that going into it. But because of the amount of notes I wrote, I just was kind of going, there's so much I like about this episode and so little I don't like.
Yeah.
I think this might be my favorite.
That's great. I mean, honestly, it's interesting. I watch these episodes and we try to nitpick them and we try to find faults in them, but it's I can't really think of any episode we've watched up to this point that I don't fully enjoy. I mean, even though there are things that are nitpicks, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so far, we're not anywhere near the episodes that we might consider on the low end. So,
Right. I worry that people listening to us are just going, crap, another 10, But I think we are obviously, I hope we come across as being critical.
yeah.
But they're just very good.
Yeah.
I do this to everything I watch. I talk about these kind of things. I look for things to critique in everything. And I critique the hell out of our own stuff.
Yeah.
But when something's good, you have to say it's good.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. Like, because they're so good, I think when we're nitpicking them, that's our way of being critical while still retaining our very positive opinion of what they are.
Yeah.
So I think it's a fair balance. I
Right.
think it's good that we do it that way.
It's as balanced as we can be. Looking at my notes, the bad category is slivers.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to argue with us, I'll have that argument.
Yeah. Okay, well, continuing our discussion, we are joined by a very special guest, director of the Six Napoleons, Mr. David Carson. David, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, last time we talked with you, it was at the height of the pandemic, I guess. How have you been?
Been great, thanks. So far, so good. How about you guys?
Yeah, so far we've evaded it.
Pretty uneventful.
Oh, so pretty boring, really.
Yeah. Well, last time we were, admittedly trying to be careful with your time. So we left some questions on the cutting room floor, so to speak. But now, since we're here in the midst of the Six Napoleons, we thought it would just be, the perfect chance to reconnect and put you through the grinder one more time. So if you're ready, we'll jump right in.
I'm ready. Go for it.
Okay. And I should say, fair warning, last time we touched on all the big moments for the most part. So this time we're going to be really kind of diving deep into those little details that we love so much.
Okay. I hope my memory will keep up with you.
Well, how about this? Before we get into the minutia, do you speak Italian?
No, I know I speak Italian. No, I don't. I speak Spanish fluently, but I don't speak Italian.
Well, I was just curious because, the big Atlantic City moment at the beginning, obviously all the dialogue is Italian, and presumably that was written by someone. Was that written by John Cain, or was it written in English and then translated? Or was that improv by the actors? How did that all come together?
No, the dialogue was written in English, and then we translated it, basically.
Okay.
The actors were able to speak Italian, except for Marina Sirtis. She had never done Italian before, so she played this entire role as a completely non-speaking Italian, and she gets away with it wonderfully well, I think. She does an extraordinary job.
Did she have tutors on set kind of coaching her on the Italian, or was she just prepared when she came in?
She was prepared when she came in.
That's great.
Nice.
And it was great. I think we may have had somebody on set just to make sure that they were okay, but they were absolutely fine.
That's great.
So in The Resident Patient, you have a scene famously with maybe 2 or 3 minutes of no dialogue.
Yes.
And then in this episode, we've got about 6 minutes of basically an Italian language movie. Was there any kind of pushback from the studio on that? Like starting a whole episode with Italian, like no English for the first 6 minutes or so.
And no subtitles either.
I think they liked the whole idea of bringing the story out, that is the background story, the mafia story out into the foreground of the story, and letting it ask a lot of questions. I think nowadays, a lot of the stories can be very, very simple, and the audiences may love Sherlock Holmes and may love how he does it, but get well ahead of the story.
Right.
So I think the idea of the mafia in the actual Conan Doyle story is mentioned once.
Right.
So I wanted to take that subplot out, as it were, and start with it, to ask questions of the audience, so the audience could then think, well, who are all these people and what are they doing and why are they yabbering at each other in a language we don't understand, and which obviously deliberately has not had subtitles.
Yeah.
And really it was to give the whole thing an emotional undertow and a feeling of emotion, violence, big feelings, breaking hearts and things like that, to play against what in essence appears to be quite a sort of happy, funny, people sitting around the fire and telling stories and things. And
yeah.
But as you can see, the other elements of it are the fact that it starts in Holmes's quarters in Baker Street with the three of them sitting around a fire and chatting about what might be coming next and what's going to happen and those kinds of things. So it was important to set those two things up to contrast with each other, and then bounce off each other until, of course, Holmes meets up with the Count in his carriage later.
Right. And we could talk about those Baker Street moments again because they're so wonderful. But I want to go back to this fight scene.
Okay.
Because there's some really incredible, memorable moments here. And I'm thinking Beppo starts doing, he's doing cartwheels, and getting oohs and ahs from the audience.
He's quite balletic. And
yeah. Was this in the script? Was this all due to a fight choreographer? I mean, how did you decide to go, full on ballet with this fight?
Well, I think it was to do with Beppo's background, which we worked out, or we talked about, him being a circus entertainer. So that he was very, very handy in his movements and everything. I mean, later on, they call him a monkey going up the trees. But obviously, he is able to climb into things and be very, very energetic. And it was important for the story that he was energetic, so that, like, when he was in the factory, he would be throwing things around and being, very, very, very physical. Again, to contrast with the sort of rather gentle three guys looking for the solution of the mystery.
Right.
So the fight was based on the fact that he was very, very good with the knife and with moving, and Pietro was not.
Yeah.
Doesn't end well for Pietro.
So when you're on set, though, how much time did you spend choreographing the fight? Was it done separately? Was it all planned, or did you kind of figure it out while you were there on set?
Well, it's sort of the normal or the usual way that I do it is we talk through the whole situation, and then we work it out with doubles off the set. And then the fight coordinator, when we've got the fight arranger, brings in the actors and works with the actors, again, off the set, so that they're not taking the production time. And then when they've got it pretty much how they like it, we bring it in and start shooting it.
Nice.
So it works in stages. You discuss it first, deal with the backgrounds of the actors. And of course, the fact that he was a circus performer gave the stunt coordinators a very good thing to work off.
Right.
And make what could have been just a boring street fight something, quite, whoa, hey, what's going on here? This guy really knows what he's doing. And Pietro's about to have a lot of sadness in his life. What's left of it, that is.
And it really pays off, because Luke and I were just talking about it, and we're fairly certain that this is, in fact, the best fight scene in the entire Sherlock Holmes series. It's, in our opinion.
Yeah, it definitely stands out from the whole series. And also just even down to the camera work involved, because there's the fight choreography is one thing, but the camera work and, like, the amount of shots and the type of shots you guys got, the kind of coverage you got, like, it really makes the thing go. And I actually kind of wondered, like, how much practice or rehearsal time was for the cameras, and also did they use real knives or even metal knives? I mean,
they used, I think they used rubber knives while they were doing the actions, which looked like metal knives. But in the end, when he's holding out the bloody knife, that's a real knife. When the thing ends.
Yeah.
The thing about the fight is, I'm a fencer, and I've done some films which use fencing, and I always reckon that it's not enough to just sit around behind or watching at a distance, the fight actually happen. And one of the keys for me is to have sequences where the cameraman becomes the other fighter, so that the knife is actually, a knife or sword or whatever it is actually aiming at the camera as if it is the other person. So you get much more proximity with the knife slashing across the screen, as I think it happens in this one, and right up against your nose. It comes up against the screen because that's where the other one would be.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it, to me, a bit more like a street fight and puts you a bit more in the middle of it. Again, to get the energy on that side of the story going, so that it's really, getting to be extreme.
Yeah.
It seems like that recurs as well, because I think I said in our conversation, we get to see, like, what I call Beppo vision later on, where Beppo's, like, going into the shop, like, he opens the door and pulls the curtain back and goes and he smashes the first bus. And it's like,
right,
definitely like POV vision on Beppo a lot of the time.
Well, the idea of that was so that we didn't give it away what was happening with the Napoleons. So the hands seemed to caress, so that there was some kind of double entendre. But does this guy hate Napoleon? What the hell is going on here? Or does he love Napoleon and think these are terrible, terrible statues of him and they have to be destroyed? And there's all sorts of things that you can actually push off to one side to slightly mislead the audience or give them options, which makes, to me, a story like this more exciting.
Yeah. The thing about him caressing the bus, by the way, was that the actual actor's hands? Because
yes,
he just grabs the bus and he smashes it with a hammer right into his hands.
Yeah, that was the actor.
Yeah.
And he does it a couple times. So, like, that's risky.
The guy who played Beppo had a lot in common with Beppo.
It seemed like he must have.
Yes.
Yeah.
He looked comfortable with all that stuff.
Yes, he was. He was very, very comfortable with it. I don't remember whether he had actually done any stunt work or not, but he adopted the character and really got inside it.
And speaking of these busts, we've always been curious. Were these designed and made by someone at Granada, or was this like a prop that was tracked down and copied? Do you know how the busts came about?
I think they were all made by Granada, or they were commissioned by Granada, because many of them were just the white blobs, the ones that appeared in the factory and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were commissioned by Granada to be made by stage scenery guys and women.
How many did you have to work with? You're obviously breaking them often, and obviously there's going to be more than one take. Did you have a limited number you could break, or were they just cranked out as needed?
I think they were cranked out as needed. I wasn't aware of a limited amount. That's why we went and smashed up, pushed all those shelves over.
Yeah. Well, and we can jump around here, but
Sure.
The morgue sequence is one that we always come back to because we just love the brilliance of the kind of single moving shot. And frankly, how many details there are.
Mm-hmm.
And a detail that popped out to me on a recent viewing that I had never seen before is Pietro's ear and his nose. When he's lying in the morgue, he has what seems to be cotton stuffed into his ears and nose. At first I thought maybe he had like cauliflower ear or something going on, but in the wide shots, that stuff's gone. I just thought I'd ping you. Do you remember this? Do you remember like why there was cotton stuffed into his orifices?
Well, I don't specifically remember, but I would imagine that in that period, they would leak somewhat.
Yeah.
So that if they leave him sitting on the table, they have to plug the orifices, the nose, ears, and the other ones.
Yeah.
So that they don't leak, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, and whoever's idea that was, again, brilliant attention to detail,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Such detail. Yeah.
Yes.
It's great.
Again, like as Gus was saying, I mean, we re-watched this episode a few times in preparation for recording, and only on the very last time I watched it, I noticed something on the floor of the morgue. It seemed to be that there was some boards set out, which I assume was for the dolly, but I wondered if it was just for the dolly to make it level, or was it to protect the floor? Do you recall any of this?
No, but I think that there were boards on the floor because it's realistic to have them on the floor. I can't remember what they're called now, but they're like a kind of bleacher that you put down, like you have in a shower. They're wooden because you have to wash the body and you have to also do other things to it.
Okay.
So you wouldn't have people walking around just on a floor. You'd have them on wooden. I can't remember what they're called now.
Like racks, like drying rack type thing.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I think that sounds to me like it was part of the dressing.
Yeah.
We chose that location or wherever it was built so that the floor was absolutely smooth because the idea of it being in one shot was right from the beginning.
Right.
So it was built in such a way that the camera could operate without having to put down boards and tracks, and it could just wheel on the floor as it was.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, so again, kind of jumping around to the very end, and we can come back, but there's a moment when the Vannucci's snatch the death certificate from the door after Beppo's been executed. And the interesting thing here is that in the entire episode and also in the story, Beppo doesn't have a last name. But on the death certificate, you guys chose to give him a last name, which was, I think, Cicciolini?
Cicciolini, yes.
Yes. Was there any meaning behind that?
No.
No?
It's just a good Italian name.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you dirty rat or something.
No,
like
we thought maybe it was like a reference to some other movie that we weren't catching, a character from a different movie.
Well, that whole storyline has references to other movies in it. And that particular moment there, I mean, basically the whole idea of Lucrezia's journey through the film is a love story because she was in love with Beppo and she wanted all that to carry on, but she doesn't get to do it. So it's like, it seemed to me to be an interesting parallel or image to take from literature to compare her to Madame Bovary, Stendhal's brilliant book, where she dreams of the perfect lover and can't get together with him and can't actually meet in the great palace and castle that she dreams of and the Alps and all of that kind of stuff until eventually one day the only place they can meet is in a dirty carriage being driven away in the pouring rain and the mud of the streets. And that's the only place in which they can have sex or make love for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And to her, it's the end of the relationship. It's so everything opposite to what her dreams were and how, she basically, her prince turned into this dirty ruffian. And one of the other images is that as he jumps out of the carriage and the carriage takes her away, she takes his love letter and tears it up and throws it out of the window so the little pieces travel, on them by themselves in the rain. So that's an explanation for how I thought about that storyline and took it from her point of view So that the imagery that we have, like all that happening in the rain at the end, and then her tearing up the paper, and the terrible imagery outside the where he's killed, and how she eventually tears up the paper and says goodbye to her love in those moments.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when we see her in the middle of the film, she's grieving for Beppo, basically.
Yeah.
Although her father doesn't want her to have anything to do with it, her line is good. And Marina was able to follow this. And I think even though the amounts of time she's seen in the episode are not that great, she takes the story all the way from its emotional beginning, all the way to the sadness of its end, which is absolutely terrific for what turns out to be a subplot, because it anchors it for the audience, and it gives the movie some color when it might have just been a very dry story about who hit these Napoleons and what was their problem with him. So yes, if you see references like that in the thing, then I'm happy, because that's what I was doing.
That's fantastic. But Marina Sirtis also has a scene, Lucrezia has a scene where she has a little gun.
Yeah.
And I actually couldn't live with the mystery any longer, so I actually got all the Italian translated for me. And in that sequence, Papa Vannucci takes the gun from her and says, no, this is a man's business. But she says something to the effect of, you know, I made this mess, I have to clean it up, or something like that. So
that's correct.
There's a moment in there where she is ready to go take her revenge, I suppose, on Beppo, which is, again, another interesting twist. And it's also interesting because that gun is amazing. It's like a tiny little golden gun.
Yes, it's great, isn't it?
Amazing prop. But I want to come back to the sign on the door, because also, interestingly, the last name, Cicciolini, it's written twice on the document. And it's almost as though I get the sense that you knew that maybe television audiences of the 1980s might have had a hard time reading the name in that tiny little handwriting. And so it got written a second time on there, even bigger. Was that the justification there?
I think the justification may have been that the rain was so heavy that it kept washing it off the door.
Oh,
and you couldn't see the thing. The thing about that was that, of course, it was in a street outside and on all of that kind of thing. And normally you have the rain controlled from the top. We, for some reason or other, the communications went wrong, and as happens on film sets so often, we didn't have any rain prepared for the scene in the street. This I remember. So we said, well, what shall we do? And I think the production manager said, well, you know, there's a fire hydrant over there. Let's plug in a hose.
Yep.
So what happened was they got this hose, and you can see it if you look at it. The rain is going up, and then it comes down. And the poor gentleman who played her father, he was absolutely so brave, because this thing was hitting him like a ton of bricks as he was standing in the middle of and he was absolutely saturated when he got back into the thing. And that was because we didn't have, you know, nice rain trickling down, but it made it much better, because this was like there was a storm going on outside.
Yeah,
right.
Which was terrific.
Yeah, well, hopefully it was a summer day. Hopefully it was warm.
I think it was. The sun was definitely out, I think.
And just a few moments later there, we have the final sequence where the credits run, and there's a girl standing next to the gate with the Vannucci sign. I just, again, we always feel like this must be a nod to another work of art, but we've never been certain, so I thought I'd just ask you. The girl standing with the gate, what's the significance there?
A girl standing by the gate who walks across the gateway. Yes, that's all.
Well, it looks like art. It looks brilliant.
Well, of course, of course.
So congratulations.
Thank you. It doesn't have to be somebody else's.
Of course, absolutely.
I kind of wondered on this episode if you had any big notes from the actors about what their characters would do, because people like Pietro and Beppo, Pietro just seems like out of his mind angry at the beginning. And I wondered if you gave him that note, or if he kind of came with that, or how that kind of discussion went down.
Yes, he was able to do it, but that was certainly the intention of the scene. The intention of the scene was that they were out of their minds angry, and they were crazy, because there, as well as the other elements in that story, there is a little bit of melodrama. And it was important too to have that melodramatic feel about it, so that, you know, these people weren't sort of shouting in an English way. They were shouting very definitely, as if they, because their feelings were so great and the feelings were so hurt. I mean, basically, she's ruined the family's honor. That was one of the reasons that I didn't put subtitles on it, because it seemed to me that generally you can tell what's going on, and actually to have it specifically explained, like, oh, Beppo is my lover, except for in that photograph, which asks the audience to make sense of that particular moment where the knife is pushed across the table.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it was all by design. And so that goes, particularly the first scene, the first two setups, which are the Italian one and around the fireplace, were deliberately set up as a contrast to each other, but also with the moving camera. So they were revealing things as the camera was doing things. So which was what the first shot did. As I think I said before, it was similar to the one where Burt Lancaster spies on Susan Sarandon in Atlantic City. And it was important to actually set up a kind of world there.
Yeah.
And then a world in Baker Street.
Yeah.
The problem with that was, would the producers be happy with the fact that there was no dialogue?
Right.
The camera was sort of hanging on somebody who snored, and then it wandered off past the fire and picked up somebody else who didn't seem to be terribly interested in what was going on, and it did it twice. So I was ready to cut out the pauses. I shot it in such a way that I thought, well, okay, this might not go down very well, but actually it did work out well, and it worked out well as a contrast.
It's definitely contrasting, and it contrasts the whole series that way, because it's like they're so down. Like even Jeremy's just barely doing anything in this not in the episode, but in that scene.
That's right.
And then the scene right before it, it's like the most energy and emotion of the whole series. And this guy screaming, spitting out of his face and like breaking chairs. And it's like,
yeah.
It's as contrasting as you could possibly get, I think.
Yeah. Well, and gosh, there's so much to talk about. I don't want to jump around too much here too, but like in that sequence, there's even some blood. Lucrezia gets smacked. And we've always been curious, was that blood on her the whole time, but we just don't see it until she turns? I hate to make you spoil the movie magic, but or did Marina Sirtis like apply it to herself when we weren't looking? Or
it was on her the whole time.
But I think it works because the camera is drifting, like you said, and like revealing different things, and you're not you're looking around, so you're not focused on her, so you can kind of get away with that. You can have it back there. You start to establish her, but then Papa Vanucci walks in and we pull focus to him, and then the smack, and it's like it's just great timing and choreography in that moment.
Yeah,
right. That's basically what it was. As you can see, the smack happens. It's a brief but hard thing, and then, as you say, they're in the background, and Vanucci takes the focus to himself in the foreground and says, "Hey, boy, come here."
Mm-hmm.
And then it's between father and son, and then off he goes, and she comes forward, and she's got the blood on it. I couldn't have done it as a continuous shot if we'd had to inject blood into it.
Right.
I don't think.
Right.
But that was part of the setting up of the shot for everybody, and the crew enjoyed doing it and phenomenally, because it involved the girl on the balcony, and the set wasn't made at that point. The camera pulled back, and as the camera pulled back, the lens was long enough so that you could then put the wall in, and Mr. Vanucci, who wasn't there to start with, as the camera moved back, and it was just like the Morgue scene, creating it with one moving shot, which I sometimes think is really, really magnetic and interesting to the audience, because the camera's just showing you the shot, showing you everything. You don't have to cut and stuff.
Precisely.
I think those moments are great. And actually, I try to like analyze that shot, and I was kind of trying to guess like what your focal length was and when the pieces moved, and, were you even on a track? And I don't think you were, but I kind of wonder in those moments, like how much rehearsal, how many takes, did you guys end up doing on stuff like that?
Well, I don't remember that,
but I mean, it wasn't all day, I guess,
No, but knowing my reputation, it was probably more than people wanted me to take.
But you got to do it till it's right.
That's right. I can't remember whether the dolly we used had rubber wheels, or whether my memory is sort of saying that because the lens had to be long in order to provide room between the girl when it's pulled back and for the wall to come in on either side of the camera and the window then the lens had to be long. So I think there was a track involved.
Okay.
And that the walls, when they came in, went over the track.
Right.
You don't see the floor anyway, because you're immediately panning away to the other two people. And you don't see Vanucci again until after he's finished leering at the girl, until he comes straight into the frame.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for people who may not know, if you're zooming far away or you're shooting far away and you have a long distance to cover, if you're not on a track, you're going to see a little bit of wobble in the lens.
That's right.
And because it's so smooth, it's a pretty good indicator that it almost certainly was on a track.
Yeah, but speaking of how long it is, though, I mean, in my mind, I was thinking it's quite a long lens. But then when I went back and watched the episode, the actual shot like starts in her water basin.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like it must have been like, I was guessing like 50 millimeters or something, like not too long.
It doesn't need to be too long. The crucial part is when it comes through the wall that isn't there.
Right.
Because one of the windows is open and there's a Venetian blind. I think there was probably enough room to do it on a wider lens. But that's right. That was the camera trick, was to get really close on the sponge.
Yeah.
Being the oranges and lemons that Susan Sarandon used.
Yeah.
And having it put on top of her head and all of that kind of stuff. So,
and this is getting into a real deep dive. We'll see if the audience even wants to hear about this. But I got to ask one other question, because in Atlantic City, if I'm recalling it correctly, it's, again, a very similar shot. But when the camera does pull back and we see Burt Lancaster, there's actually a pane of glass in the window. So they actually only could have gone as far as the glass, if I'm not wrong. Do you remember this?
That is right. And you can see that they're doing it, because when he's watching her, he's obviously looking at her through something. The shot of her is not just a straightforward dolly shot straight up to her. There is a glass. So I reckon that the lens was pretty tight. But again, it was built. You had to build it, like we did.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned one thing about how you shot this in a way that, if the powers that be didn't like it, it's possible you would have cut those scenes. Do you remember if any extra footage was shot to make up for the time, if that would have happened? Do you remember if there are any deleted scenes? We're always wondering, if in any of your episodes, if there were sequences you recall that didn't make it into the final cut that had any substance,
No, I don't think there was. I think with that, it's just a thing about the length of stuff and exactly what's happening in it. And there's a difference between cameras which are motivated to move and things like that. Producers sometimes want the camera to be motivated, so you don't move across a cafe scene unless somebody's crossing in front of you, which takes the camera there. But this was meant to be like those great Italian and French directors, where the camera is all by itself. It has its own brain and looks at what it wants to look at.
Right.
So my argument with myself was, okay, well, I think this is the way to do it. But I do understand if it takes too much time and it's not right and somebody wants to take it out. So I just made points inside the movement of the camera where we could simply cut out the movements of the camera so it would cut between them.
I see.
Rather than be this thing. But in the end, everybody liked it. So that was just a director covering your ass, as they say.
Sure, of course. Well, so very shortly after filming The Six Napoleons, Jeremy Brett started to have quite a bad time. His mood swings were becoming more and more pronounced, and he suffered something of a nervous break, I guess you'd say, and he admitted himself to Maudsley Hospital. This is all, fairly well known. But when you were shooting The Six Napoleons, did you sense or feel anything out of the ordinary from Jeremy?
No, he was as alert and he was as involved as could be. In fact, I think he very much enjoyed the episode. He enjoyed it because of the imagery that we put in at the end, which was not in the script, to turn him into a magician with the tablecloth and the laying out of the black thing and prepping the thing and putting the riding crop there and getting it out and then suddenly smashing it.
Yeah.
I think he really enjoyed those moments and actually sort of training so that he could really do it. And we didn't have to use, you can see he really does it, which is great. And another trick that he wanted to make sure happened like on the stage is when he's in that little office or whatever it is, and he's got all these papers out and he's throwing them down onto the ground and everything. He said, David, can we do this, like Fado does it when we change costumes off? Because I had to change my costume and come back in here. Why don't we see if we can do it without having to cut? So that is why that movement is in there, because we discussed that, and that's why he does his thing, disappears, and we pull back and we find Watson snoring.
Yeah.
Go pan across to Lestrade and he's snoring. And then he comes through. Now he's completely dressed and full of, and his hat, and he's got his blankets and everything. So it was meant to be another little bit of sort of magic that we could keep the audience guessing with,
Yeah.
I timed that one out, and it was under 9 seconds.
It's pretty good.
He goes from wearing just a shirt to a jacket, a coat, a scarf, a hat, having their scarves, jackets, coats, and then also exits the room, walks in the other room, and just while the camera's pulling back. It's like very impressive.
Yes.
I'm sure he must have loved that kind of stuff.
Jacket, coat, and stuff were all one garment.
Okay.
So he had to go into just one garment. I
assume there was like 3 or 4 people just ready to just throw things on him at that point.
That's it. That's right.
That's great. We've always been curious, and maybe you're in a unique position to answer this because you did 4 episodes, but there are episodes where, and I'm thinking of the Abbey Grange right now, where Jeremy had a scene with another actor, and in particular when he was on screen with that other actor for a long shot, you got the sense that Jeremy almost subdued his performance to kind of give a little gift to the other actor to shine, in those moments. And I get that sense here with Eric Sykes, with Gerald Campion, with all of the supporting cast here. I feel like he's really stepping into the background a little bit and kind of giving them the moment. Did you sense that at all, or did you feel like that was just came naturally to Jeremy? How did you feel about those?
I think it's his instinct. His instinct is, in my opinion, is to always support the other actor. We spent some time with Eric doing his work because he was a little bit deaf, and so it made it sort of slightly different, or quite a lot deaf, I think. It's very hard to do period pieces when you have something like that, and you can't have hearing aids and stuff like that while you're doing it. And all I ever remember Jeremy being was immensely generous and encouraging always to the other actors.
Yeah.
There was never any sense that he was sort of trying to steal a scene or stand on somebody's dress so they couldn't move, or, those old tricks.
That's funny.
Well, it happened.
Yeah.
But I do think that the thoughts about Ingmar Bergman and where the audience was very much in the front of his mind. He wasn't thinking about the balance of the scene. I don't think he was thinking about where he can take the scene. For instance, the famous scene between him and Lestrade at the end. The two close-ups there are very, very interesting. Not the two close-ups; it's the cut between the two, because it's one shot, just one shot, and he prepared so that you could see his eyes start to tear up. I mean, that's a very, very special skill to just do for that short amount of time. It was one take. You didn't need anything else. But it is remarkable how you can see that develop between the two of them. If you take out the cut to Lestrade in the middle mentally and put them both together, you can see how he develops it.
Yeah.
Very, very wonderfully talented. Alec Guinness I never had the pleasure of working with him, but he has a lot of the same abilities and extraordinary ways of communicating with the audience.
Yeah. Okay, well, before we have to let you go, I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on the other episodes because we have you here one more time. And really just specifically Musgrave Ritual, because we were going back through it and, thinking about things we wish we had asked you. And one of the big questions was Brunton's rigor mortis position when he's down in the hole and they find his body.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's not the same as the Paget illustration, which I know you guys, tried to use and stick to from time to time. But we were just wondering if there was any meaning, because his position is very distinctive. I mean, it's haunting and it's disturbing, frankly, but it's also strange. And do you recall the thinking behind his position?
Well, the only thing that I recall is that the thinking behind it was to ask as many questions as possible and not have any answers for it.
Well, mission accomplished.
So that basically he died a macabre death down there, amongst all the bits and pieces that there were. And from all his trickery and planning and everything that he'd done, he got what was coming to him.
Yeah.
I do remember the position of the body, but I can't remember exactly what the decisions were.
We were trying to work out if it was like he was trying to clutch for air or if he was trying to reach the lamp or something. Yeah. But then we kind of also wondered, because, the Paget illustration, I think he's doubled over with his head in the box. And it's like, it's not very cinematic, but it's also, to shoot that, you're either just shooting down a hole, so you'd be filming his back and it's not very interesting, or you'd also have to shoot it somewhere else so you could remove a wall to be next to him to show it interesting. So we thought maybe you just went, let's just give him something cool and interesting to do. Or scary or macabre, like you said,
Probably the latter.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it worked.
Yes, it was basically, the hole was a hole. It wasn't in a studio.
Right.
It was shot at that location. We dug a hole and made the thing work.
Well, that's a question we actually had for you also, is where exactly was that hole? It was the hole there across the pond and in the basement, or was it just close to the same area?
It was across the pond and in the basement.
Oh, okay. So you actually dug a hole there.
Yeah, we've actually dug an actual hole in the ground because it was flagstones, and under the flagstones was earth.
Yeah.
So we just dug it up, put it in a pile in the corner, and then put it back.
Wow.
I mean, it's great. It's just surprising they let you do it.
Yeah.
Well, it's a National Trust property, so you're right.
Yeah.
It is surprising.
Yeah.
But they very, very, very rarely allowed people in Baddesley Flinton. Now I believe people can go visit it if they want.
Yeah.
But in those days, they didn't. And there were huge restrictions about whether or not we could use dollies on the floors,
right,
and how many people were on the floors. So there are no dollies on the interiors. There's no smooth tracking shots, only handheld stuff, which actually suits the story very, very well.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. There's so many different ways of doing it, but they got on well with us at Baddesley Clinton. I mean, and I think we behaved ourselves pretty well. The only people who hadn't were the electrical drivers.
The grip truck, yeah.
That's right, the grip truck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have a really deep dive question for you about the ritual, but I'm going to let Luke ask it.
Yeah, well, we've since reproduced the ritual in paper form. But in doing so, obviously I was referencing the original story, which there's two versions of in the original story, because they added in a line, I think they said to make it make sense for Americans, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But then in your episode, there's a prop that was made, but when they recite the ritual, it's different than what's written on the prop.
Well, and we talked about this last time, and we know that it was changed for the sake of the grounds, yeah, so that it would actually make sense there.
Yes.
But the question we actually had was the ritual document that you see on screen, which again, in 1980s television, you know, you would never expect anyone to probably be able to like read that in great detail. But now that we have
it's hard to read it now.
Yeah, but right. But now that we have it in HD, we can actually read it. And the steps that are written on the prop, which is a beautiful prop, obviously, are different than what Musgrave reads aloud. And so we were just curious, like, is that because the prop was made, you know, months in advance, and once you got there, it was like, well, we can't go with those steps. We have to change it. Do you recall this? Do you recall the prop?
I also wondered if it was maybe that was Musgrave misremembering the steps. So that's why he never solved it.
Yeah.
Yes, Musgrave didn't have much of a clue.
Yeah.
I think that's the. I know. I think that practically speaking, what happened was that for the amount of time that it's on the screen, we probably thought in those days, as you say, they thought, well, nobody's going to look at this. We'll just carry on and do that.
It works either way, but it was just kind of interesting to actually kind of try to reproduce that and go, okay, there's 4 versions of it. Which one do we want?
I would have the one that matches up with the movie, wouldn't you?
That's what we did.
That's what we did. Yeah. Well, what was your next assignment right after Six Napoleons? I mean, I guess the reason I'm asking is, was there ever any talk of doing more episodes down the line for you?
No, and I don't remember.
Okay.
Would you have wanted to do more?
Yes, if it was good to do them, I think I would have wanted to do more. But I think I did some more television stuff, and then I went to America pretty soon after that. I worked with Robert Powell doing Hannah, a series called Hannah, and just carried on. But it didn't come up again. I remember at the time I was one of Granada's directors, but I went to London to do some other work for the BBC or on other series, and moved out of the north to there. That's when my relationship sort of stopped with Granada and moved on towards America.
Well, last time we spoke, you were working on a few projects. Heartland was one of them. And what are you working on these days? How's everything coming together?
Well, Heartland is now nearly financed.
Oh, great.
And we're planning to go there, be there in early 2022. And we're now offering the grandfather role to actors.
Nice.
So we're hoping that we're going to be ready to go any second now.
Great.
There's a lot of stuff we have to do because it's a co-production, international co-production with the UK and New Zealand, which is, tedious but necessary. But we're very much closer to it than we were.
Great.
There's another one called The Benefactor that I'm doing, which stars Malcolm McDowell, funnily enough. And we're putting that together right now.
Fantastic. Well, David, what can we say? I mean, I'm so glad we got to do this with you around the Six Napoleons, because it's just one of the best, and it's nothing short of an honor to talk with you about it today. So thank you so much.
I'm very pleased to be asked. Believe me, it's an honor to keep talking about it, because I think they were really great. A lot of them were really great. It was such good fun to do.
Maybe we'll have you back, and someday we'll get your thoughts on some of the other episodes down the line.
Yeah, I'll have a look at some of the other ones and give you a critique on my friends.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, David. Thank you so much.
Okay.
We'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing all about the Six Napoleons. Bye-bye.
Well, that was fun. I hadn't really planned to connect with David, but I'm so glad we did.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, do you have any housekeeping items today, Luke?
Yes. Relics, Volume 2.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting very close to unveiling the new set, and we hope to have it done by Christmas, but as a lot of people are experiencing right now, we are facing some delays with certain pieces, but as though you needed one more teaser, and since we're already talking about the Six Napoleons,
yes,
we both think this would be the crown jewel in the entire collection.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to say we've been able to reproduce it successfully. We've had a lot of help on that front from a couple of the listeners and people, so thank you for that. We're also working on a framed photo of a particular woman. It's quite special to Sherlock. Possibly a nice hiding spot for your tobacco, wacky or otherwise, and maybe one or two other items.
Excellent. And while those are going to be available in early 2022, we do still currently have the first Relics kit available for purchase, which contains the Musgrave Ritual, the Red-Headed League, the Devil's Foot Bottle, the Blue Carbuncle, and more. And I think at this point, we cannot safely promise it could be delivered by Christmas, but it makes just as wonderful of a post-Christmas gift for anyone considering picking one up. One note on these, I'm not sure we're going to continue to produce these after this set is gone. I think we have a dozen or so left, but it's a really fun collection for the Sherlockian collector in your household, and you can find that on our website at sherlockpodcast.com, where we also have the Reichenbach Falls poster available for purchase as well. Also, a quick belated happy birthday to Mr. Colin Jevons.
Yes.
Our Inspector Lestrade, who turned 92 on October 20th. Obviously, we're a bit behind on this one, but we've received many notes asking us to try and interview Mr. Jevons, and we have been in contact with his family, but they've informed us that Mr. Jevons is no longer doing interviews, and we respect and understand his wishes, so we simply wish him the very best, always.
Definitely. In a previous episode, we mentioned that David Stuart Davies' wonderful book, Bending the Willow, would be returning to bookstores after being out of print for many years. Sadly, the publisher fell through, and Bending the Willow is once again in limbo. But we've been in contact with Mr. Davies, and it seems as though another publisher has picked it up. So hopefully it won't be too long before it's for sale again. Fingers crossed we don't see any more delays on that, and we will definitely share a release date once we have one.
Yeah. And speaking of David Stuart Davies, the winter issue of Adrian Brady's new Sherlock Holmes magazine just came out, and Davies' column this issue is about his adventures meeting Jeremy Brett. The magazine itself has a great photo of Jeremy in his deerstalker on the cover. The photo appears to be from The Solitary Cyclist, or maybe The Final Problem, though the background has been replaced, and it kind of looks like he's standing on the rock face where the Fellowship of the Ring emerged from the mines of Moria.
Excellent.
But it's a sharp cover, and the article by David Stuart Davies is about 3 pages, which is nice. There wasn't a ton in there I hadn't read in other books, but perhaps a few tidbits that were new. Overall, the magazine's great, as always, full of great articles and news about all things Holmes. A must-have for any Sherlock fan. Highly recommended.
Very cool. On a slightly different note, for our foreign language listeners who have been asking about putting subtitles on the YouTube videos, we know it's been a long time coming, but we have added those. There's a number of auto-translated language in the subtitles options. So you have to click the button, but they're in there. And do please let us know if we need to add any.
You mean add any additional languages?
Yeah.
Okay.
If there's any, that we're missing.
Cool. Okay, well, before we get to listener telegrams, I wanted to mention something. As we continue to have conversations with folks who worked on the series, we always bring up the BAFTAs and how Jeremy deserves one, and everyone always agrees. But there seems to be little hope of it actually happening, which, is saddening. But it got me thinking, there could be other things we could do. And I'm just kind of talking off the cuff here, but I was in LA the other day and found myself on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I don't believe Jeremy Brett has a star there. And I think getting one is just a matter of paying a fee. So maybe that's an option. But also, one of my other passions is the original Twilight Zone. And the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation just started a Kickstarter to get a life-sized monument of Serling erected in his hometown of Binghamton, New York. And my buddy Tom over at the Twilight Zone podcast has been aiding in that fight. So as much as I think a BAFTA is the ultimate recognition for a British actor, I kind of feel like maybe we should spend some time looking at some alternatives that could actually be achieved without the roadblock of, stuffy bureaucrats that are too steeped in tradition to actually do the right thing here.
Yeah, I think our listeners probably be into that too. And I mean, I know over there in the UK they do the blue plaques, where people lived or where they were born.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, maybe a statue or the Walk of Fame could be a great thing. I mean, I know there's the bench and there's the tree, but
Yeah, and I'm just thinking out loud, but I mean, maybe if any listeners out there have any ideas along these lines,
or connections.
Yeah, get in touch. We'll put our heads together and, see what we can do. We need to keep Jeremy's memory alive, and that's why we're here.
Agree.
All right, well, let's dive into some listener telegrams. Okay, so without going into too much detail, as we've mentioned before, we've been collecting interviews with cast and crew members of the show, which we're still trying to figure out, how to release effectively. But in our travels, our London producer, David Ewell, had an opportunity to reach out to a certain Mr. Holmes for an interview. Very sadly, Sir Ian McKellen did decline to speak to us, but he did send us an interesting little note, which I will read now. He wrote, "Thank you for writing. You'll excuse my not contributing to your program, as I'm not, honestly, an expert on Jeremy Brett's Holmes, though you are right that I admired what I saw of it. I'd been a fan after seeing him as Cassius at the Library Theatre in Manchester when Iago was played by Robert Stevens. They shared smokes at one point on stage, and having perhaps mislaid his matches, Iago ad-libbed a very un-Shakespearean line. 'Have you got a light?' This was much talked about in the press at the time. Jeremy Brett was so handsome that a mannequin was made of him, looking stunning in whatever shops draped around him. Ever, Ian McKellen." So, yeah, pretty cool to hear from Sir Ian.
Sir Ian.
Also a bit sad that he didn't want to talk, but I don't know. I found it interesting, though, because I actually always assumed he did know Jeremy.
Yeah.
And I think that's just because I've heard him talk about him on quite a few different occasions, different, lectures and things. But alas, very nice of him to write us a note.
Yeah. It's one of those things you want him to have known him.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that about the mannequins. So if anyone has one of those, get in touch.
Yeah, I did do some digging into this, and the company that made them is still around. There's not any information on their website, but if you search the internet, there are some photos of Jeremy posing with the mannequins.
Yeah.
And, they're not amazing quality, but we'll upload those as an artifact for this episode.
Yeah. You have to see these.
Yeah. They're interesting. They're fun.
If the company still exists, I wonder if we can have one made, if we can, commission one or something.
That'd be great, but I'd be very surprised. But yeah, we'll look into that some more as time goes.
Yeah.
Our next message comes from Kathy, who sent us a note on YouTube in response to The Man with the Twisted Lip. She wrote, "I've long agreed with you about the opening sequence of this episode being odd. My take is that it was a teaser, sort of. Start the intrigue early. My other problem with the opening is the timing. Didn't Isa Whitney go missing on a Wednesday? And St. Clair/Boone disappears on Monday. If that is the case, Boone could not have been on the street to see Whitney go down the alley on Wednesday. I think they got their days mixed up in all the flashing back and forth. Love the podcasts. Looking forward to the next." Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, once you said that, it did seem a bit off all of a sudden to me. Luke, you did some research into this. What did you find?
Well, it's kind of like you said. It did seem that way. I think she's right, but there is a possible explanation for this. And it could just be that the writer wanted them to appear to have crossed paths at some point. So it's kind of like what she was saying, like the beginning scene was a little bit of a teaser. And since they were both creatures of their daily habits, this could have just been a Monday or any previous day, really.
Sure.
I thought maybe we were just trying to confuse the audience a little bit because Elias Whitney, his wife Kate says, normally his orgies are confined to one day, but he leaves the house every morning and returns in the evening pale and shattered.
Yeah.
And then Neville St. Clair, Holmes says, he travels to the city every morning, returning by the 5:14 train from Cannon Street every night. So they both go to the city and do their thing.
Every day. So I think, like she says, I think it's probably just meant to be a teaser. I think it was just like a fun way to get them both on screen. Sure.
So yeah, but it is confusing because if it does look like he's going down the alley and then he's just lost and he's off his face at that point.
Right. Never to return.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's probably just a blind.
But yeah, hopefully that maybe answers it.
The next telegram is from Nancy, who writes, "Hello, Messieurs Gus and Luke. As a composer/orchestrator who worked in films during that late 1980s era, I have always had a great admiration and respect for Patrick Gowers. I especially enjoy your comments on his artistic contribution to this great Granada series. Perhaps you will, hopefully, interview someone directly involved with his work for your podcast about all his wonderful music." I'll just pause there briefly to say that we have actually had a few really wonderful conversations that we're working on assembling into a special tribute episode, hopefully in the very near future. But yes, that's a great idea, and we're right there with you. Nancy continues, "If I may respectfully suggest, where you find the music inappropriately set, i.e. those blatant, grating stingers when the sheet is pulled up and Mr. Adair's body is revealed, for example, are possibly the work of post-production and not the input of any self-respecting composer. You allowed for that, I believe, and in my experience, unless a composer is in the room for the final mix, strange things can and do happen." I'm going to pause again. And what's funny is that one of the experts on the music that we've been talking to is a very good friend of the show named Josh, and without giving too much away now, he has been making his way through all of the original sheet music from the Gowers estate. And after the last episode, The Man with the Twisted Lip, he actually sent me this little note, which I wasn't going to read, but it's in line with Nancy's inquiry, so I'll read it real quick. He wrote, "Just a note on Twisted Lip. Indeed, the random reprise of the opening theme must be a post-production thing, as there is no score pages for it, unless the pages are missing. Cue number 4 would be the Upper Swandam Lane scene, which was, as far as I know, improvised, and the next official cue is cue number 5, St. Clair Rencontre, which starts after Holmes's line, 'Something quite singular took place.' So I don't think Gowers had intended a cue there, or it was added later." So yeah, hearing from those two experts, you kind of start to get the sense that while Gowers was the composer, sometimes things happen, and we've even been guilty of this from time to time too, reworking music of composers who have worked with us, just to make things fit into a scene or whatnot. So it does happen sometimes, but again, great observations on all sides.
Mm-hmm.
And getting back to Nancy's letter, what's particularly striking is how Mr. Gowers evokes the classical repertoire in a subliminal way in his music for the Holmes series. For instance, in The Illustrious Client, there are echoes of Mozart's vile, unrepentant Don Giovanni, which only heighten our evil apprehension of the wicked villain played by Mr. Valentine. These are subtle but most effective musical moments that only a talented composer such as Mr. Gowers could employ so successfully. Cheers, and looking forward to your future podcasts, Nancy. Well, thanks, Nancy, for writing in. And yes, you're so right. Patrick Gowers deserves so much more attention than he receives. And we're trying our best to do our part. And, we're really excited about this special episode we have planned. But like everything, it's just going to take us a little bit to get it together. But, when we do, I think you'll find it pretty fantastic.
Definitely.
Friend of the show, Matt, writes, "Hi, Luke and Gus. First, wanted to compliment you for an amazing podcast series. The life of a Holmes fan can be a lonely one, so your podcast is the first time I've ever heard others discuss the series. Your production format and the information you provide is truly insightful. My one request would be to please keep in mind that the way films are made, /shot, /produced, is a total mystery to myself, and when you pause to explain a technical aspect, I'm thankful. That in itself has been an education for me. I've only ever watched TV movies as a viewer of the story, but now I find myself thinking about how a scene is shot, etc."
Yeah. I'm glad people actually enjoy it, because this is the kind of stuff we just talk about naturally. So
yeah.
I hope that for people listening to it, they're not just hearing us talk and thinking that we're just gassing on about the stuff we do. So good to know people enjoy it.
Well, I'm sure everybody gets something different out of it, but hopefully there's a little something for everybody in there.
Yeah, and maybe it just makes you appreciate the show a little bit more, knowing, okay, that shot was difficult.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of extra something to appreciate.
Yeah, exactly. Matt continues, "I'm so excited to hear the Six Napoleons podcast. It's both my favorite story in the canon and my favorite episode of the Granada series. Please do explain to listeners just why people in London would want to own a bust of Napoleon. I certainly can't work out why, but the Baker Street Irregulars book publishing the original manuscript explains that Doyle was thinking about statues as he had invested heavily in an enterprise that was the Victorian equivalent of scanning a statue/object and replicating it, the equivalent to the 3D printer of the time. The enterprise failed. Okay, well, I'll pause there for a moment. Yeah, I don't know if you read about that in your annotations, Luke, but
No.
Conan Doyle did kind of buy into what he thought would be a good investment opportunity, the use of new technology. They talk about this in the annotations of the Oxford edition. Here, I'll read a little bit of it. It states, "It was in 1902, when Arthur Conan Doyle was staying in Giola, the island near Naples, owned by his sister's husband, that he first saw the Mechanicglofo, or sculpture machine of Augusto Bontempi, and it so impressed him that he decided to bring it to London. The Automatic Sculpture Syndicate, under the direction of W.G. Jones, opened for business in a shed near Albert Suspension Bridge in Battersea in the summer of 1903, and it was being promoted at the time the Six Napoleons was written. The machine was designed to copy busts and moldings, but proved an expensive failure, as it tended to split the original marble and could not provide finished copies."
So I hadn't heard about this email, but I actually was just Googling it while you were talking. And the sculpting machine, it's hard to tell from this photograph, but what it looks like it's doing is similar to like what a pin router does. If you've ever made like a guitar template, for example, you can make a template and then you have a router on one side and you have a pin that follows a guide of the template on the other side so you can do your cuts.
Yeah.
And it looks like a very kind of complicated version of that.
Kind of like a key copying machine. It just copies the shape. Yeah.
The movement. Yeah, it like scans the shape and then cuts it. But I assume it was probably very rigid.
Yeah.
And it was breaking the marble and like it said, not doing a finished copy, meaning like not doing a very nice copy.
Yeah.
But a good idea.
Yeah. And as for why anyone would want a bust of the emperor, well, I mean, I think at the time, in spite of his flaws, the intelligentsia did consider Napoleon a great military mind, and, busts of famous leaders were, well, I mean, far more popular than they are right now. That's really the only reason I can think of.
Yeah.
But back to Matt's letter. And now a question. If you could produce a podcast on another TV series in the same style, what would it be? If it were up to me, I'd make you produce one on the original Inspector Morse series with John Thaw, but I suspect you'd go in the direction of a different genre. To be honest, it's hard to think of another TV series that is truly up at the level of Granada's series and Brett's performances. Thanks again for everything you do. All the best, Matt. Well, thanks, Matt. Well, I mean, it's a fun question. It's come up a few times. Hard to say. Luke, do you have a show you'd do if you could do another podcast?
Not really. Like I don't have a go-to show. Like I feel like you have a couple of go-to shows.
Yeah, the problem is there's just so many podcasts out there. I mean, it seems like everything has a podcast nowadays, and I wouldn't want to be one of 100 podcasts about The Prisoner, but I'd love to talk about it, or the original Twilight Zone, but there's just so many podcasts devoted to both those shows. Tom Elliott's Twilight Zone podcast is, in many ways, my inspiration for this podcast, but maybe we could talk about the films of David Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that makes this one so fun to dive into is the literary source material and the fact that we both love the show so much. I mean, I'm not sure there's anything else that we both equally enjoy that kind of has a written word associated with it. Maybe Lord of the Rings, but there's countless Lord of the Rings podcasts.
Right. I thought maybe like Stanley Kubrick or something, but that, we're not talking TV at that point. But
yeah,
I think Gus and I have a lot of different influences.
Yeah, but that's part of the reason why, it makes it fun for us to come together to talk about this one.
Yeah, exactly.
But, maybe something else will bubble to the surface, or maybe I'll finally get you to watch the original Prisoner and you'll love it as much as I do.
Yeah.
All right, well, this episode's getting a bit long in the tooth, so I think we'll just read one more tonight. This missive comes from Christy, who writes, Dear Gus and Luke, I first got into Sherlock Holmes way, way back in my high school days, where I read through the original canon and watched as many Sherlock Holmes adaptations as I could find. I had always heard the virtues of Jeremy Brett's performance as Holmes, but I never got around to watching the series. It wasn't until this year when I happened across your post in the Replica Props Forum discussing the Sherlockian replicas that I felt like it was high time to give Jeremy's Holmes a gander. In no time at all, Jeremy has become the Holmes in my mind, the one whose voice I now hear in my head when I read through Doyle's stories. At his peak, Jeremy's Holmes is an enigmatic showman, skillfully and carefully conducting his cases in ways to provide the maximum dramatic payoff. Holmes can't just break the last Napoleon, he has to set the stage, put on a performance for Watson and Lestrade while doing so. And what makes those great highs all the more compelling are the moments when Sherlock is at his weakest, when he's ruminating, or, as we see in the Six Napoleons, when the mask slips. Holmes's utter astonishment at Lestrade's genuine praise, how shaken he is to receive it, and how the only way he can save himself is to deflect the emotion and take salvation in his violin playing, these are the moments that make Jeremy's Sherlock truly shine. Behind all his theatrics and seemingly endless bravado, there is something very fragile within Jeremy's Holmes that in this instance managed to bubble up to the surface, something that the great detective has to visibly struggle with to keep down. I find it such a travesty that Jeremy was not able to live a long and happy life, and on a more selfish level, it is such a shame that his ill health prevented him from appearing in Granada's adaptation of the Three Garadeb story. Doyle's original version of the story has yet another instance of Holmes's mask slipping, where Holmes witnesses Watson getting injured by James Winter, and I know Jeremy would have played that moment beautifully had he been able to. Thank you for giving me the inspiration to finally get into the Granada series. I feel silly for having taken so long before I stopped to watch it, but at the same time, I'm glad that I was able to do so when I'm at the point in my life where I can fully appreciate how wonderful Jeremy's performance is. Thanks again, Christy. Well, that's great to hear, Christy. I'm glad to know people are still finding the show by whatever means. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, and the fact that you've watched so many other iterations of the show just means you'll be able to pick out the little details that make this one even better.
Yeah, for sure. And as for the Three Garadebs, yes, the moment when Watson gets shot or nearly shot by the villain.
Spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler. But here's a taste of the text that Christy was describing. In an instant, he had whisked out a revolver from his breast and fired 2 shots. I felt a sudden hot sear, as if a red iron had been pressed to my thigh. There was a crash as Holmes's pistol came down on the man's head. I had a vision of him sprawling upon the floor with blood running down his face, while Holmes rummaged him for weapons. Then my friend's wiry arms were around me, and he was leading me to a chair. "You're not hurt, Watson, for God's sake, say that you're not hurt." It was worth a wound, it was worth many wounds, to know the depth of loyalty and love which lay behind that cold mask. The clear, hard eyes were dimmed for a moment, and the firm lips were shaking. For the one and only time, I caught a glimpse of a great heart as well as of a great brain. All my years of humble but single-minded service culminated in that moment of revelation. So yeah.
He loves his Watson.
Yeah, the cracks in the marble too, as Jeremy would say. I think you're right. I think he would have played that moment brilliantly, and it is sad that we never got to see it, but the stuff we did get, and tonight's episode particularly, what a legacy Jeremy left us.
Yeah, I think that's the sad thing, is I wonder if he knew how appreciated he was, either in his own time or as he is now. So it's a shame he couldn't know that the legacy lives on.
Totally agree. I wanted to take just a quick moment, once again, to extend a thank you to everyone who continues to write in. We say this all the time, but we seem to be perpetually behind in replying to emails, but, we do read them, and we appreciate hearing from you more than you know. So, just knowing how many like-minded fans of Jeremy and the series there are out there really means the world to us. So, as always, thank you for listening and for sticking with us.
We wouldn't keep making the show if people weren't listening, so thanks for sending the stuff in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. And a very special thanks to writer John Kane and Mr. David Carson for taking a stroll with us down memory lane. As always, please do find us on YouTube, on Facebook, and on the web at twitter.com/SherlockPod. And please do send any thoughts and feedback to contact@SherlockPodcast.com. And to our Patreon supporters, thank you for keeping us going. Your continued support and good wishes really mean the world to us. And if you would like to help support the show and enjoy some bonus content as well, including some extra tidbits from David Carson's most recent visit, you can find us at patreon.com/Sherlock Podcast. The next episode is going to be a milestone of sorts. Of course, I refer to the first, and possibly the best, of the 2-hour Sherlock telefilms produced by Granada. I hope you'll join us next time for our examination of the Sign of 4. Until then.